Why didn't that work? Because
Let's see if I can get this.
maybe they'll know. We are waiting for the signal to go. We're live, everybody, I do believe. If you are out there, we are here. We're about to do a show, waiting on the signal from the Bat Cave. Ready to roll. Oh, look, we're live. So I guess that means, yeah, we can start a show. It's very exciting. I was listening as I was getting the show ready to a Dr. Seuss rap, so now I want to rhyme everything. I will avoid that temptation and start the show in 3, 2. This is TWIS, This Week in Science, episode number 771, recorded on Wednesday, April 29th, 2020. How to read tree rings. Hi, I'm Dr. Kiki, and tonight we will fill your head with Neanderthals, spider combs, and underwater bones. But first...
Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. There is a bee shortage in America. When a bee stings somebody, its stinger falls off and the bee dies. So why not glue them back on so the bee doesn't die? Then we would have plenty of bees again. When a child comes up with a solution to a problem, it's adorable, no matter how silly that solution may be. We can encourage that child to keep coming up with more creative ideas. It is a form of curiosity and a sign of self-motivated learning. When the leader of a nation, with 1 million people afflicted by a respiratory virus with over 60,000 dead already, believes that after months of access to doctors, researchers, and experts in disease control, they suggest that maybe injecting disinfectants into lungs or massively irritating people with ultraviolet light on the inside could help. It is not adorable. It shows a lack of curiosity in the basics of how a human body works, let alone anything he could have learned by listening to and asking questions of the experts at his disposal. This is a form of narcissistic ignorance, and it is the sign of an incompetent idiot with less than a high school biology student's understanding of the human body. Actually, less than a junior high school student's understanding of biology. And I would even probably say there's elementary students who would have told you that's a bad idea. Thankfully, the idiot is not actually in control of our country's research. And as the research continues to rely on scientific method, there is a treatment at the end of the tunnel. And that treatment is here on This Week in Science. Coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind that can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science to you, Kiki and Blair.
And a good science to you too, Justin and Blair and everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. We are back to discuss all the science that we see fit to put in the show tonight. And there is a lot of it, as you know, science never sleeps. It just keeps on churning through the world of questions, curiosity, and then on to uncovering, discovering, and knowledge. All right, I have stories about some underwater bones, a bunch of COVID-19 updates because there was a bunch of science that came out in the last week, and a core conundrum. It is. Justin, what did you bring?
I've got matriarchal Neanderthals, question mark. Ancient teenage giants with big sharp teeth. And swimming with the dinosaurs.
Very nice. I would not swim with the dinosaurs. I don't want to swim with the fishes
Not the one
either.
in this story. Definitely not.
Yeah. All right, Blair, what's in the animal corner?
I have sick bees, I have spider combs, and I have shrew spines.
So Justin's disclaimer was apropos to the
I try to
Animal
take a little
corner.
of both what you two are bringing and combine them into the disclaimer.
Very nicely done.
Yeah.
Very well done. Okay, let's jump into the show. But first, I need to remind you that if you are not subscribed, all the places that you can subscribe to This Week in Science, you might be missing This Week in Science. So you can subscribe on YouTube and Facebook and all the places that podcasts are found. You can also find us at our website, TWIS, TWIS.org, twis.org. You can look for This Week in Science, all those places, and hopefully you will find us and be able to subscribe. And you will find us weekly, because this is what we do every week.
And you can giggle with me every week when she says, before we jump, we're going to jump into the science, but first. It makes me giggle every time.
I like it. I like it. Very nice. I had never put that together before, and now I will have to keep myself from laughing. Oh, that's good. I would love to introduce our guest right now. Dr. Valerie Trouet is a dendroclimatologist, paleoclimatologist who uses the study of tree rings to describe past climates and give us insight into now and the future. She is an associate professor in the Laboratory of Tree Ring Research at the University of Arizona and has recently published a book called Tree Story, which is published by Johns Hopkins University Press. Welcome to the show, Dr. Trouet.
Thank you so much for having me, Kiki. I'm very excited.
You're welcome. I'm thrilled to have you here. I mean, I got a look at the galley of your book a couple of months back, and it just was, it is very well written and personable, and it gets to the idea of why you study tree rings. But can you explain to us here and now how you got interested in studying tree rings in the first place?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot, as you can imagine. Not many people dream of becoming a dendrochronologist when they grow up. I had never heard of tree rings until I was looking for a topic for my master's thesis. And my master's was in environmental engineering, and I was very much an idealist in my early 20s. So I wanted to make the world a better place. And my idea of doing that back then was to go to Africa and do research there. And so I was looking for a master's project in Africa, and the only project that was available at my university was to do tree ring analysis in Africa. So I'd never heard of tree ring analysis, but I figured if that gets me to Africa, then why not? I'll start doing tree ring analysis. So I went to Tanzania. I collected some tree ring cookies, as we call them, came back, and that's started looking at the cookies, the wood under the microscope, and that's when I really got hooked on tree ring analysis. It's so beautiful to look at wood under a microscope. It really opened a whole new world for me, and yeah, I've never done anything else. After my master's, I went on to do a PhD, and then I just kept doing tree ring analysis. There's so many angles to so many scientific questions to answer with tree rings. It's a very exciting field of science.
I remember coming across tree rings, I think, for one of those things in high school biology, or it was early undergraduate, and it was described that tree rings are like a map of the tree's history, that you can understand things about the trees by looking at the rings. And I remember looking at a stump of wood and trying to count the tree rings that were there, and it's hard. And I I would love to know how you actually go about doing the work that you do. How do you find out what's in? From the outside, it's like tea leaf reading. That's what it appears. But you're doing actual science with it, so it'd be great to learn how you do that.
Yeah. So first thing I should mention is that in the vast majority of tree ring studies, we don't need to cut down trees. So we have a hollow core with which we take a sample from the tree that and then extract it. It's a bit like a biopsy or like drawing blood from a person, but then from a tree. So we don't kill the trees. The process doesn't hurt or harm the trees either. And so then we go into the field, we collect these samples, come back to the lab with like a stack of maybe 100 or 200, depending on how many people were coring those trees. The first thing you then do is sand the wood so that you can look at it under a microscope. Because you do, as you mentioned, sometimes it's hard to see the rings, and it's much easier to see them if the wood is sanded, and it's easier to see them through a microscope as well. And then it depends a little bit on what the aim of your study is. So I'm a dendroclimatologist. My aim for studying tree rings is to look at the climate of the past. But there's a very big application of tree ring analysis in archaeology, for instance, where they look at the patterns in the rings of archaeological wood, and that allows archaeologists to date when a building was built. Also, for instance, art historians use it to date paintings or musical instruments and so forth. There you go. That's a good image. So you look at the pattern of wide and narrow rings through a microscope, and trees that grow in the same area at the same period of time will show similar patterns of wide and narrow rings in their stems. So it's a bit like a barcode on in the supermarket, or like a Morse code where you have a sequence of wide and narrow rings, wide, wide, narrow, narrow, wide, narrow, wide, wide, and so forth. And trees that grow in the same area will all have that same barcode, because a lot of why a tree grows a wide ring in a certain year or a narrow ring in another year is because of the climate under which it grows. So I live in Tucson. The trees in Tucson, they like water. You know, it's always warm enough in Tucson. It's not that it gets too cold for trees to grow, but it does get too dry for trees to grow. When it's a very dry year, the trees don't like it, and they form a narrow ring. On the other hand, when it's a very wet year, they like it and they're happy, and they're going to grow a fat ring. And so the trees in Tucson, they're all going to grow a narrow ring in the same year when it's a dry year, and they're all going to grow the same, all going to grow a wide ring in a wetter year. And so you can match the patterns of trees that grow in the same region by looking at their patterns, because they're the same. And that principle also allows you to then look at the climate by looking at whether, I'm just saying 1580 was a wide ring or a narrow ring. You can tell something about what the climate in Tucson was like in 1580 by looking at whether it was a wide or a narrow ring in that year.
And how well does this fossilize? Because you mentioned they can do this back into fossil records too.
Subfossil records, yes. So we can go back. We're not limited to living trees. We can do it on dead wood from trees that have died. Some trees, have died 1,000 years ago, and their stems are still on the landscape. We can do it in wood from buildings and wood from musical instruments, as I mentioned. And then in what we call subfossil wood, which means wood that has been preserved in peat bogs or in riverbeds or in sediments where it was covered by water, and it was the wood was kept in circumstances without oxygen and anaerobic circumstances, and that's how it was preserved over time. And so using wood from peat bogs, the longest continuous tree ring chronology that we have up until now is from in Germany, from oaks and pine trees in Germany, and it goes back more than 12,000 years. So we have a record that goes back more than 12,000 years, and we have a ring for every one of those years continuously. Now, if we're really talking about fossil wood or petrified wood, for instance, that's like millions of years old. That's a whole other category. We're at 12,000 years. Petrified wood is millions of years old, so we haven't crossed that bridge yet.
I'm wondering if they're in the petrified category, and even for the more recent wood that you're looking at, are there chemical signatures that you observe as well as just the size of the rings?
Yeah, so really, really good question. There's a whole line of research that looks at isotopes in tree rings, so carbon and oxygen primarily, isotopes, and that allows us to study the tree physiology over time, but also it's also used to look at the climate in the past. And then one of the things that we do in my lab is looking not just at the width of the ring in each year, but also looking at how dense the wood is in each year. And then I can talk about tree rings a lot. And then to come back to your chemistry question, a lot of people ask me like, so tree ring dating, do you use radiocarbon dating to date your tree rings? And actually it's the other way around. So tree rings have been used, a 12,000 year long record is used to calibrate the radiocarbon curve, because they can do a C14 measurement, a radiocarbon measurement of every ring over that 12,000 year period. And so know for each year what the atmospheric radiocarbon level was like. So, yeah.
Do we have, I mean, you mentioned in Europe, in Germany, that there are these oaks, but do we have that kind of record around the world? Because last week we were on the show, Justin brought a story about agriculture in the Amazon. And, it would just be, I'm just wondering what kind of a global record we have going back in through history.
Yeah, it varies quite a lot. So the oldest living trees by far are here in North America. So you have the oldest living trees globally are the bristlecone pines that grow on the border between California and Nevada in the White Mountains. And the trees live to be 5,000 years old.
Wow.
And so you can add dead wood to that to bring that chronology back. I think that chronology is now 8,000 or 9,000 years long. You have the giant sequoias in California that are more than 3,000 years old. In South America, there's some really old trees as well. But that 12,000 year record from Europe is quite unique. That length we don't get everywhere around the world. So.
It would be amazing to have that kind of continuous record going back that far, but I imagine it's very hard to find those resources. How do you, the peat bogs are a very unique situation that would preserve wood in that way. Would there be any other situation? Maybe what are the tar? The
tar pits in LA.
The tar pits, La Brea tar pits, yes.
That would be very cool. I hadn't thought about that. Well, I mean, one of the things I learned from this book, and one of that I didn't know beforehand, and I must say, like, I'm a professor of dendrochronology. I teach, my title officially is I'm an associate professor of dendrochronology. I teach a class in dendrochronology, but there's so much that I didn't know before writing this book about my field. But one of it's really a great way to learn a lot. one of the things that I found very fascinating is to go back to the petrified wood that you were talking about, Justin. They found petrified wood in Antarctica. So, 220 million years ago, Antarctica was a rainforest, basically, or at least a temperate forest. And so they can, even though you cannot link the rings in that petrified wood,
you don't know
to the present.
which years in that 200 million, 220 million. You can't really nail it down, but you can still see the.
But you can see the
rings.
Thing. You can see the rings, and so you can count them, so you have an idea of how old the trees were that were growing in that forest. And they also figured out that because there are rings in those trees, there must have been seasonality, because otherwise, seasonality in the climate, otherwise you don't get rings. You need to have a winter and a summer. So that means that the insolation must have been of the Earth versus the Sun. Sorry, the configuration of the Earth versus the Sun must have been so that seasonality was possible in Antarctica 200 million years ago. So there's a lot to learn there that I find very exciting.
When you're looking at the trees, you mentioned the Sierra Nevadas and being here on the West Coast, and I came from California. Blair and Justin are Californians as well. The droughts that we've been experiencing are, have been reported to be historic in scope, and you've done work on that. Can you talk a bit about your work looking at oak trees in the valley?
And that's curious, because actually I've always heard the opposite, Kiki. So this is fantastic. I've heard that we got here in a wet spell and that this is normal. So yeah, now we can both get enlightened or
That's
get
right.
rid of that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So my research group and we use tree rings from the blue oaks in the Central Valley of California, which, out of all the trees in the world that I've ever worked with, the blue oaks are the ones that are most sensitive to how much rain falls. So whenever it's a dry year, they're going to show a super narrow ring, and every wet year is going to show a super wide ring. So they're very, very good recorders of dry and wet years in California over the past. They're about up to 500 years old. So the blue oaks come out of the Central Valley, and in 2015, when California was in a very big drought, so in the midst of the 2012-2016 drought, on April 1st, the snowpack numbers came out for the Sierra Nevada in California. So with California being a Mediterranean climate, as you all know, the amount of snow that falls in winter is really important, because you're not going to get any summer rainfall. So on April 1st is a date when they announced what the snowpack had been like that winter, because at that point, by April 1st, they're not expecting much more snow anymore, but it also hasn't really started melting yet. So it's a good point in time to look at the snowpack. And so 2015, April 1st, snowpack numbers came out, and it was dismal. It was horrible. There was so little snow because they were in the midst of a very deep drought. And so the snowpack number came out, and all over the news, it was like, this 2015 is the lowest snowpack it has been over the last 80 years since we started measuring snowpack in the Sierra Nevada. And so when my postdocs and I heard that news, we were like, you know what? We can do better than that. We can use our tree rings to put that 2015 snowpack not just in an 80-year context, but in a 500-year context. So we used those blue oaks from the Central Valley that I was talking about to reconstruct the Sierra Nevada snowpack over 500 years. And lo and behold, 2015 was the lowest snowpack it had been over 500 years. So that was one of those moments where, like, you realize, like, this is really important what we found here. And it's exciting as a scientist to see. It's always exciting to find something that we didn't know before. But then you realize this is not good news. This is really bad news.
Yeah.
So it's a bit, yeah. double.
So, Justin.
I was wrong. Yeah, the thing I heard was the thing somebody told me when I was a kid was wrong. But it's funny. It sticks with you. You don't until something pushes it out. It's still there. So this is unprecedented with the 500-year time scale. We haven't had droughts like this in California.
Yeah. So that we're talking about a 2012 to 2016 California drought. The snowpack hadn't been as low as that in the past 5 years. Yeah.
In your book, you also talk about fires in the West and how you look at fire scars on trees. I think that's really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned there?
Yeah, that I really like that line of research a lot. So we can also look at fire history using tree rings. So again, this is work I also did in the Sierra Nevada in California, but it's being done all over the Southwest by colleagues of mine, and the Pacific Northwest as well. So when a fire hits a forest, and when it's not a destructive fire, but like a low intensity or a ground fire, it will not kill the trees, but it can harm the trees. It can damage the trees. And so a fire can leave a scar in the trees, and this is what you're seeing here on this figure, can leave a scar in the trees. And then when a few years later, let's say 5 or 10 years later, another fire comes through the same forest, that space on the tree, on the stem of the tree that was hit by a fire before, that was damaged by a fire before, it's going to be very sensitive. So when another fire comes, that same wound is going to be hit again, and it's going to create another fire scar. And so what you see here, it's from a sample in California, in the Sierra Nevada. You can see those, I'm pointing at it, but I hope you can see it as well. So there's all of these labels, all of these scars that are labeled. So you can, this tree was hit by 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 consecutive fires. So yeah, that's great. So you can really see the scars there. And so by using tree ring dating, you can date the year when those fires happened. And it's a very precise science. You can even, in many cases, not always, but you can even tell what time of year the fire happened by looking at the position of the scar within the ring. If it's in the beginning of the ring, it was a spring fire. If it's towards the end of a ring, it was a fire that happened in the fall. Now, I really like this figure in particular because you can tell that this tree was hit by a fire roughly every 10 years. You know, the first scar is somewhere in the 1600s. The last scar is, I want to say, maybe 1885 or 1890. And in between, every 10 to 20 years, there's a fire that hit the Sierra Nevada forest. But then you can tell that the most recent scar was 1890, whereas this tree, the sample was taken in the 1990s. And in the entire 20th century, there is no scars at all. So up until the 20th century, you get a fire every 10 years or so. And then all of a sudden you get a century of no fires. And that we call the Smokey Bear effect, because that's what happened. That's when, Europeans showed up in 1905. Teddy Roosevelt established the Forest Service. And back in those days, they thought that forest fires were bad, was something that we needed to prevent, to preserve our forests. They didn't know what we know now, that actually forest fire is a natural part of the forest ecosystem. But so as a result, we've been so effective, so efficient in putting out fires that I collected about 2,000 fire scarred samples in the Sierra Nevada. Maybe 10 of them had a fire scar in the 20th century. There's like almost no fire scars to be found in the 20th century at all. And this is, again, not just in California, this is over the whole American West. But you can imagine that if the natural way that, or the way the fire regimes used to be was frequent fires every 5 to 10, 15 years. Those were ground fires, right? So this sample is a very good evidence of that. They might hurt the tree, but they didn't kill the tree, because otherwise it would no longer be there. So every
it's a 10-year cycle of like shrubbery or some kind of
exactly
fallen material that sort of builds up, and then fire comes through, clears that out, and it gets to start over again. But if we're preventing that first fire from happening, we're building a bigger tinderbox. Right?
Exactly. You have this huge buildup of fuel that's supposed to be burned off every 5 to 10 years that now is no longer burned off. And so when now a fire happens, you no longer get these innocent ground fires, but you get these massive, huge fires that do kill trees and that are very, very difficult to control. So that combined, this is not happening in a vacuum. This is happening while temperatures are rising, while California is so dry. So it's really a perfect storm for massive, destructive forest fires.
Yeah, as living in the West, we've been seeing a lot of those recently, which is really unfortunate. The landscape of the West is changing as a result, but perhaps it'll lead eventually back to a more regular, natural pattern of these smaller fires. Unfortunately, we've allowed stuff to build up too long. Yes, Blair.
Well,
it sounds like we're good. We're going to be on a 90-year cycle.
There's another issue, though. I mean, at least in California, I know we have lots of invasive plants as well that have moved in at this exact same time that there's a lack of forest fires, some of them including eucalyptus, which release noxious gas when they're burned. So I think there's other weird factors besides just a lack of forest fires in the past 100 years that could have a pretty big impact on our wild plants and animals.
And there's some farms that if they catch fire, they'll have a very calming effect.
Right. Very true.
But maybe we're on a 90-year super fire. Like if we've done, no, it doesn't sound like you're agreeing with that.
I don't like this. I don't like this idea at all. Valerie, from your book, you've also taken the storytelling perspective of moving through space and time and human history with tree rings, which I think is just a wonderful way to get people to understand tree rings. How did you come to find these stories in your book?
Yeah, I think that the idea to write a book through storytelling came intuitive, or it's just how it ended up being. But there are such great stories in tree ring research. You're absolutely right. And actually, this book came to be because I was on sabbatical, and I was actually approached by an editor from Johns Hopkins University Press asking if I wanted to write a book about tree rings, a broad audience book about tree rings. And my first reaction was like, I don't like that. Of course, that already exists. It's such a tangible science. As you started the show, Kiki, with saying like, oh, when I was in high school, we learned about tree rings. Most people, at least in temperate regions, know the basic idea that every ring in a tree represents 1 year in that tree's life, and that you can extract information out of that. But few people know all the stories, all of the science that comes out of that fairly straightforward idea. And so my first reaction was like, such a book already exists for sure. And then I thought, well, I actually don't know of any broad audience books about dendrochronology. So I agreed to do that, to write that book. And then there's so many good stories. The science really sits at the nexus of what we've already discussed, right? We can study climate using dendrochronology. We can study wildfires and ecology using dendrochronology. We can study human history and art history and archaeology, all using the same technique. So yeah.
What's your favorite story?
I want to say my favorite story, the one that is the one of some colleagues of mine who found ghost forests in the Pacific Northwest in the Cascade region. And so ghost forests are forests that were trees that were killed at some point in time in the past, and they're still standing now. And so they tree ring dated those. There's like 3 or 4 of those ghost forests, and they found out that all of the trees died in the exact same year. So they all died in 1700. And even more so, they figured out that because the trees were healthy, it wasn't as if their rings were getting narrower and narrower before they died. They were healthy up until the point that they died in 1700. And so they realized that something must have been up. And they by collaborating with geomorphologists, they figured out that there must have been a really big earthquake in the winter of 1700 that caused subduction and that caused the area where those forests, where those trees were growing, to be flooded by seawater because of the subduction, and so the trees were killed in the seawater. So that per se is already a very cool thing to figure out. But it gets better because on the other side of the Pacific Ocean in Japan, there are historians who study documentary data, documents from Japanese history, and they had discovered that there was a big tsunami in Japan on January 26, of the year 1700. Because there was documents all over the place of shipwrecks, of agricultural lands that were destroyed, of towns along the Japanese coast that were destroyed, and so forth. But they called the tsunami the orphan tsunami because there was a lot of the evidence of that a tsunami had happened in 1700, but there was no evidence of what might have caused, or no documents about the cause of that tsunami. So there was no one documented an earthquake or anything of the kind. But when the Japanese historian started talking to the dendrochronologists from the Pacific Northwest, they put one and one together. They realized there was a very big earthquake in winter of 1700 in the Pacific Northwest. Oh. And there was a very big tsunami on the other side of the Pacific Ocean in winter of 1700. And so it was that earthquake that the ghost forests had been killed by that was so big that it caused a tsunami on the other side of the ocean. And so that kind of collaboration between historians and dendrochronologists and just putting the puzzle pieces together, I think that's very, very cool science. Yep.
And on this side, on the Pacific Northwest, they were killed by salt water after there was some sort of a collapse, and then that water killed those trees right there before the tsunami made it to the other side.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So yeah.
Very
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's also relevant because we haven't had earthquakes of that magnitude in the Pacific Northwest since Europeans have arrived there. So we have no record. We didn't know that earthquakes could get that big in the Pacific Northwest. So now we have to take that into account.
Early wave effect. There were a couple big ones up in the Portland area.
Sure,
yeah,
but not,
been a couple. Maybe not that big yet, but
not that big that they would cause a tsunami on the other side.
I say this because that's where Kiki is. I'm very
where I am. He's
far
just
away
trying
from
to. I'm just gonna sit here and smile and go through all of my disaster preparedness kit because we're in the middle of COVID. Okay, I'm eating all my earthquake kit chocolate right now. Within the book, you also talk about various places that you've traveled to do your work. You mentioned Africa at the beginning of the show for your master's work. What other places can you tell us about? What were some of the most exciting places that you've gotten to visit for trees?
Yeah, I went to Tanzania and Zambia early on in my career. The Sierra Nevada was gorgeous in California. You know, I grew up in Belgium. I'm Belgian originally, and so I did all of my education in Belgium up including my PhD, and then moved to the US for a postdoc. And so I don't know if any one of you has been in Belgium, but it's a very densely populated country with no concept of hardly of nature, leave alone of wilderness. And so coming straight out of Belgium, I was dropped in the Sierra Nevada to start doing this fieldwork on my own. And so it was a very good introduction to the idea of wilderness, and also to just, knowing, as an environmental scientist, it's so much more, it's very exciting to be in the Western US. There's a lot to do. And then some of my favorite fieldwork was in Greece. So I've been to Greece quite a few times, and actually up in the mountains in Greece, there's very old trees there. And we found the oldest tree in Europe, which is about a little over 1,000 years old on one of those field trips in Greece. So, Greece, it's very nice. The weather's nice. You hike up a mountain for a few hours. You spend the day coring trees. I mean, the advantage of being a dendrochronologist or field work is you hike up a mountain and you spend the whole day. The oldest trees are often found on the top of mountains. So you spend the day with these gorgeous views in this beautiful forest. And then you hike down at the end of the day and you're in Greece. So you get really good food and the people are super friendly, and then you do the same thing the next day. So that was really.
I'm sold.
So yeah,
I'm gonna switch careers here now. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're considering a career, I'm sure. This sounds like if you like being in nature, you like these. This is where your research has to take you. That's amazing. Perfect.
Yeah,
that's wonderful. One of our listeners is asking, are there some tree species that are better timekeepers than others?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Yeah, so most of the tree chronologies that exist, so we are a very open community, and we have a database that's publicly available of the tree chronologies that we have developed, and it has about 4,000 locations across the earth in it. The vast majority of those are from conifers. So needle leaf trees form clearer rings than broadleaf trees, generally speaking. There's a few exceptions with the broadleaves. Oaks have very nice rings, but otherwise, the conifers, I wouldn't say they're better timekeepers, but they make it easier for us to read their rings.
And is it because of the climate that they're in? Is that
that's one aspect? Yeah, so that's one aspect where if you want to reconstruct climate, the best places to go are either at high elevation or high latitude where it's cold, or places where it's dry, right? And so in the Western US, most trees are conifers, right? Same if you go to Alaska, Canada, Siberia, it's mostly conifers. So that's one reason. The other reason is that it's quite simply the wood anatomy of conifers, of needle leaf trees, is much simpler. They only have one kind of cell that they just repeat over and over again. They came much earlier in evolution, so they're simpler kind of tree. Broadleaf trees, their wood is gorgeous. It's beautiful because it has all kinds of patterns in it. It has different cells that have different functions, but it makes for a more difficult ring to read, typically. Yeah. Right. So.
Has anyone done a transect survey from the far north down through North America, Central America, South America to look
Patagonia?
Yes, down to Patagonia.
That's a good question. I think we have, there are definitely tree ring chronologies from Alaska, Canada, the boreal forest, the Rockies, obviously Mexico. It gets trickier once you get to the Amazon because the tropics are more
That's
difficult.
what I was wondering.
Yeah. So
if it's always raining in some parts, it must.
Exactly. It's always raining. It's always warm enough, so you don't really get that period of the year when it's bad for the trees and they stop growing. That, and two, actually coming back to what you just said, Justin, or what I just explained, that tree rings are clearer in conifers versus broadleaf trees, and tropics it's almost exclusively broadleaf trees. There's almost no conifers to be found. So combination of a more difficult wood anatomy with a more difficult climate, it's not impossible. There's actually quite a lot of tree ring chronologies from the tropics, but it's slimmer pickings than in colder or drier regions.
Right.
I'm curious, since trees have been here for a lot longer than we have, if you could kind of go way far into the future and look at tree rings, what do you think? Because what do you think the Anthropocene will look like in tree rings? Because in some places we're having fires, in some places there's a lot extra carbon dioxide that could impact growth. Do you think there's going to be some sort of universal sign of what we've done to nature in tree rings?
I have a story for everything, but one of my colleagues actually sampled what he called the loneliest tree in the world. It's a tree that was planted in the early 1900s on a very small island, like somewhere between Tasmania and the Antarctic and the Antarctic. So it's a single tree on an island that is 500 miles removed from anywhere else, and so he calls it the loneliest tree in the world. And he sampled he took a tree ring sample from the tree, and he found the radiocarbon spike that happened with the nuclear bomb tests in 1963. So there's the nuclear bomb tests of the early 60s are often considered the start of the Anthropocene because they leave a mark that is not going to go away. And so by sorry, I feel like I'm
just
making this
imagining-
this is real talk.
news
That,
show.
the phrasing of the phrasing, the way that left a mark that's not going away. I'm just imagining my child when he was a toddler writing on the wall with unwashable pens with a Sharpie marker or something, right?
That's a really good analogy, actually. So anyway, he found that marker in the loneliest tree of the world, and so he's like, if even the most remote tree has recorded that, then that should be the start of the Anthropocene. As to, you know what? I think it's actually a great question as to what the future. I think that's maybe another book. What the future will be like in tree rings. For instance, what you were talking about, that the increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere increases plant growth. We don't see that in the tree rings at all. Nowhere. And that is an active field of research, and whereas we see the greening up of vegetation in satellite images and in other metrics and flux towers and so forth, in actual the carbon that's being put down in the wood, which is what we look at with tree rings, we don't see that carbon fertilization effect at all, which is interesting.
And it's also really important because we're looking at carbon markets right now with forests as a major part of how the carbon markets, how it all works.
Yeah, and that's,
like...
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to say...
Dr.
Go
Trouet.
Well, I was actually going to say, the whole concept of afforestation, of the carbon markets, we're going to plant trees to solve this climate change problem, it is very complex. We don't know what trees. Do you plant fast growing trees that capture carbon fast, but they don't live long? So if you want to keep that carbon for a long time, you got to plant slow growing trees, but then, they go very slow. They capture it very slow. And then you got to protect that, because you only need one forest fire for everything to go back up into the air. And do you plant trees in little patches in the city, or do you go for giant plantations in Siberia? And what kind of species do you plant, and how far apart do you plant them? I mean, there's a lot of issues, a lot of unknowns that are worth studying, and it is a very active field of research. So people are studying it, but it's not as simple as let's all plant a tree and this problem will solve itself.
Nothing is ever as simple as we'd like it to be, unfortunately. No. Justin, did you have one more question?
Oh, I think I was piping in something about maybe the trees, they're not taking up increased carbons because they can also survive in a much lower carbon environment than the one that we have now. So they're not. It's not that just because there's more availability, they're already using as much as they need, and they could probably survive with a lot less carbon in the atmosphere, having evolved through many, many cycles of our environment over the years. It doesn't. Not everything wants more. It's just a very human thing. There's more resource available, we'll use more. That's just how we are. And that's a really good point. And also, if they use more carbon, it's not, they don't only need carbon to grow. They need nitrogen, they need water. If they want to grow more with more carbon, they're also going to be using more water. So it's, there's other limiting factors with carbon alone. And there was some paper that it was, I want to say it was the state of Montana, which doesn't seem to fit with being this progressive, or maybe it was a suggestion for the state of Montana. But there was a climate report that was arguing about if like say with the recent fires in California, you lost this elevation of this forest. Should you plant what was there before, or should you be looking at planting something that's going to be more suited to that in the 40 year from now climate? There's a whole other aspect of what do you plant where that does make the thing very complicated.
Yeah, definitely.
But I say just keep planting trees. As long as you're planting trees, figure out if you're doing it right later. But if we're planting trees now, at least it can't hurt.
Yeah, that's true. Right. That's true. Yep.
Right. Final question as we sit here, some of us in our wood frame houses with our wooden dinner tables and maybe chairs. Some, we have modern materials now, so there are many more of those in our homes these days than there used to be. But when you look at objects around your house, or even look at the wood frame houses that you're walking past on the street, do you see history in front of you? How does what you do inform how you see the world?
Yeah, I am biased by my job. Yes. there was a time when I was doing the kind of forest fire history work in California. For fire history work, we mostly sampled stumps from trees that were cut during the mining period, during the 1850s to 1900s. So most of our samples were taken from stumps. So I was when I was doing that field work, I was mostly looking for stumps that could be fire scarred. And for years after, whenever I went to the forest for a hike, I wouldn't be looking at the trees, I'd be looking at the stumps around me. But also, as you mentioned, looking just at wood everywhere. I think, and this also comes back to the topic we just discussed of planting trees is good. It's good, and by using the wood of those trees that you planted, you can store that that carbon that's captured in the wood. you can keep that out of the atmosphere longer. So if you build houses with that carbon's not going up into the atmosphere. It's not just living trees that capture carbon, it's also wood. So doing things with that wood, so wooden buildings don't just allow us to look at the past, but it's also a way forward for the future, I think.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a wonderful, I've loved getting to hear from you about your work and your book, Tree Story, The History of the World, written in tree rings. And it is available. It's available now. Where can people find out more about it and you?
You can buy Tree Story from Johns Hopkins University Press, where it was published. I would urge you to, in normal times, to visit your local bookstore, but that's harder now. But a lot of them are online. So if you want to support your local bookstore and support my research as well, then that's a good way. But it's also available on Amazon and on Barnes and Nobles and so forth. If you want to find out more about me, my lab has a website, and then I have a website for the book as well. So I can send those links.
Fantastic. The Trouet Lab, Laboratory of Tree Ring Research at the University of Arizona. And we will have links on the TWIS.org website. Thank you again for joining us. Really appreciated it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. We are going to move on to some science news stories. So without any further ado, stay tuned for a little bit more This Week in Science.
Explain things you've heard with more than intuition. A line of reason shows the way to go. New conclusion. The methods of hypothesis and patience are the only things I need. Put on a pair of goggles and go looking for the things I couldn't see.
And we're back. You're listening to This Week in Science.
We are back. It's time for us to talk about, it's the COVID update time.
Update me. What do we got?
Yes. Well, things are not good.
I knew that.
You knew that part of it. But there is some really great scientific research going on. This week, a couple of studies were published that are very interesting. One in The Lancet. It's an article that is a controlled randomized trial of Remdesivir, which is the Ebola antiviral drug produced by Gilead, which has been brought up again and again throughout the media, but has not had any of these controlled trials done previously. There were trials, just not controlled. So there were no placebos, no randomization. Finally, that's been done. The Lancet study was very small and did not find a significant effect, but did find a trend toward patients who were given Remdesivir to recover a little bit more quickly than those with placebo. Then, second study, this one was an NIH study, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, NIAID, produced this randomized controlled study in which, again, Remdesivir was shown to have a beneficial effect on patients who were given the drug early in recovering earlier, 4 days on average, than individuals who did not receive Remdesivir. It was a significant enough effect that they stopped the early part of the trial because it would have been unethical to continue giving a placebo to, they considered it unethical to continue giving a placebo to the patients that were not receiving it.
4 days could be a game changer right now.
It can be a game changer. Anthony Fauci went on record as saying this should become the new standard of care for patients. So it's not necessarily going a cure all, but it is the first, it could potentially be a first line defense to get people who are in very serious condition to recover a little bit more quickly, which would be great. Additionally, we have vaccines that are in development. At current count, it's somewhere around 90 vaccines globally that are being developed. One vaccine was in the news this last week. The New York Times reported that a vaccine being produced by Oxford University researchers, the Edward Jenner Institute for Vaccine Research, that they had done a trial on 6 vaccinated rhesus macaque monkeys and a similar number of placebo monkeys, and all of the vaccinated macaques stayed healthy at least 28 days after exposure to SARS-CoV-2, and that it caused disease in all of the unvaccinated animals. So, promising animal study response. We don't know if this will translate to humans. Secondarily, it hasn't been published. This was a scoop by the New York Times. It has even been disavowed to a certain extent by the Edward Jenner Institute for Vaccine Research. If you go to their website says basically, we haven't published anything yet, and if we're going to publish it, don't look at results in the newspaper. Look at all the results here. We'll publish them here on our website if something happens. So,
Wow.
it's a very interesting result. But they do say that their timeline is that if everything goes to plan, human studies and everything, that they might have phase 3 human results by earliest of fall 2021. So it could take actually, no, I'm sorry, by autumn of 2020. However, they don't have, which would be early.
Much better.
That would be
Much
great.
better.
Yes, by
Yeah.
September 2020. But that would be the data back from the earliest phase 3 efficacy trial that would be possible. But there would be many more trials needed to be done by 2021 to get to actual regulatory approval.
And so what's also sort of interesting here then is, I mean, where there's two things. There's like the treatment drugs that are coming on, that are going to be brought on quicker because they might save lives.
Right.
But the vaccine, the thing about it is you don't want to give somebody a vaccine that gives them a false sense of security and sends them out into the world thinking that they are not going to be affected any longer, and it ends up not working or only working for a small portion of the population. So that is going to be a longer process. The other one is, in some cases, the only arrow or the last arrow in the quiver to shoot at this thing, and so that's why you're going to see sort of tried on humans sooner.
Right. Now, along that line, stuff that's very interesting, Sandia researchers are looking at using CRISPR to treat COVID. They have been looking at this very targeted RNA and DNA antiviral treatment for a while for other diseases in response to other coronaviruses and various other infectious vectors. But now that COVID is such an issue, they are specifically starting to look at the specific RNA sequences that could be targeted by CRISPR, and CRISPR treatment could potentially be on the horizon. They're saying they don't know anything. They're just trying it out. We'll see if it works.
Yeah, a CRISPR treatment's interesting. That's just this is, I don't know if this is a thing.
It would go in and it would edit your cell. It would be a very short-term edit. It would go in and target the machinery of the cells that it would be potentially responding to the viral invader and allowing the virus to make lots of copies of itself. And so it would be a process of putting a spanner in those works and keeping it from happening.
So this is, and I know this isn't a thing, and so I'm going to sound very much like the idiot president. We're like, somebody should look into like something really dumb. But wonder if there's a way to make a more innocuous version of the virus itself that people could be catching that
You mean like
doesn't
a
have
vaccine?
the respiratory effects, but the body responds to it with the same.
Okay.
Yeah,
You
like
mean
a
like other
vaccine,
coronaviruses?
but an actual
So-
one that we just get and sneeze on. Like,
Yeah, like a-
yeah,
like a-
like that
like
we
a-
sneeze on each other, that everybody gets. You
Okay,
get the
so
fever.
now
It
you're
spreads like
leading
wildfire.
you're leading me into by another study which just came out looking at it. It was a study long before COVID occurred, and it was looking at the common cold and it followed a cohort of people over a year and did lots of nasal swabs to find out what people were getting infected with, and they found that many times there were four coronaviruses that gave symptoms similar to the common cold. And when this cohort of people would get these symptoms, they'd come in. They found that individuals got sick repeated times from the same coronaviruses, and sometimes multiple times, and sometimes in very short order within a month of having been sick previously. So what this new study potentially tells us is that if things work the same for SARS-CoV-2, that our bodies may not be able to maintain immunity, which would be a real problem for vaccines.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this a lot because there's been a lot of stock put into the whole antigen test thing.
Yeah.
Which only works if you can't get reinfected. Otherwise, it does not matter if you're carrying the antigen.
Yep.
And we don't. And what was the thing that there was like one of the tests that they've been using has 10% false positive.
No,
So it has-
15% false negative. And that's one of them. It's a rapid COVID test, and
That's
it's
a COVID test.
Yeah.
The
there's
antigen test has a 1% false positive, but
Yeah.
the way the math works, it's actually way worse
Yeah, you
than
test
you would
everybody. Well, yeah, the way that works is if there's 1,000 or it'll make it if there's 100 people and it's 1% false negative, then you're going to get a result of 2. You're going to get one that has it and then one that doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's really only 50% chance that you have it if it shows that it's positive. The one I heard was much worse. I heard it was 10%. I heard it was 10%, which means that it's actually a magnitude more people would come up with this thing, even though they didn't have it, which meant you still only had a 10%. You only had a 10% chance of actually having it if you got a positive test, which would have that's ridiculous. That's not good.
Yeah,
But there
so
were some other stories of like new tests, rapid tests coming online.
Yeah, there are a lot of tests coming online. This is great because we really need to improve our testing and the ability to track and trace cases, because that is the only way that we'll be able to relax a lot of these social distancing measures. Another study looking at social distancing in China, in Wuhan and Shanghai, found that, oh yes, social distancing, it works, and you need to maintain social distancing measures to maintain a reduced level of infection within your population. Closing schools also doesn't work on its own to stop infections, but it can reduce the peak by 40 to 60% and delay the peak from happening. So everyone who's wondering whether closing schools had been a good idea, according to this Chinese research, yes, this was a very good idea. And then my final article was actually a blog post that someone sent me this week that was written by a researcher, Jeremy Samuel Faust in Scientific American Blogs. He's a doctor, and he looked at his COVID-19 emergency room and all the people that were coming in and all the people in intensive care. And he said, there's a lot of people in here. We don't get this many people in our emergency rooms and intensive care for the flu. I've never in my career seen anyone die from the flu. And then he went around and asked a bunch of doctors that he knew, have you seen anyone die from the flu? Yeah, one or two, a couple, blah, blah, blah. Everybody, I mean, if people have been dying of the flu at the same scale that people have been saying the COVID is like the flu, if that had been occurring, we would have been seeing our emergency rooms and our intensive cares overrun, but they haven't been. And it turns out that the CDC has been using predictions for many years and not actual case fatalities that are reported by hospitals for the flu. And so the CDC, the numbers that had been reported by the CDC, 25,000 to 69,000 flu deaths per year, they are estimates that the CDC produces by multiplying the number of flu death counts reported by different coefficients produced in algorithms that they use. And they are based on assumptions of how many cases, hospitalizations, and deaths they believe went unreported. And so in the last 6 flu seasons, the reporting method has changed, and they've been reporting actual confirmed flu deaths, and that has ranged between 3,400 to 15,600.
Wow.
Incredibly lower than the numbers we've seen elsewhere.
I agree. I this is unprecedented when it's actually precedented, but it's unprecedented. It's unprecedented recent history that we've had this. But one of the things though that I would imagine is a lot more people probably died at home from the flu than not going to the hospital, thinking they were just sick. You would take aspirin, drink some orange juice, and then it got a worse turn. People, I think, are running to the hospital with the fevers now, where they might not have before.
So I will argue that people are not, because there are multiple factors with COVID-19 that people are not realizing that they are in as bad a state as they are. Many individuals, especially younger individuals, people don't realize that they have as low oxygen levels as they do. People are actually very hypoxic when in fact their bodies are not telling them that they're hypoxic. So that oxygen loss is very detrimental. And then secondarily, we're seeing did we talk about this last week a little bit? The coagulation of blood factors. So this is something that's come out more so in the last week, that there seems to be an interaction between SARS-CoV-2 and the blood in some way, whether it's a downstream effect or a direct effect, that's yet to be determined. But what they are finding...
Increasing or decreasing coagulation?
Increasing, or at least increasing thickness of the blood. So young people are dying of strokes. And so there could be a lot of people dying of strokes at home before they ever make it to the hospital. So there are a lot of things that are lending our numbers for the deaths reported in the hospital and our real numbers. There are so many factors that are... there have been several articles coming out this week saying that our death numbers are probably vastly underestimated as well.
The interesting one I heard out of Florida was Florida wasn't recording COVID deaths if the people who died weren't Florida residents.
Oh, what?
If you were a student who moved there, or if you were traveling there, if you just moved there, if you didn't have residency in Florida, you were on vacation and you got this and you died there, they weren't reporting that number as a COVID death because they felt that they were only responsible to report deaths of Florida residents, and that wherever that person was from maybe should have reported it, but that wasn't up to them, which nobody else is doing. But so what if anybody dies in Florida who's not a resident of Florida, meaning also any future citizen, undocumented person who dies of COVID in Florida would not have been registered as a death from COVID in Florida. which is just insane because the whole point of reporting these numbers is to give red flags and alerts and be able, and they're
Well, that's what it comes down to, right? Is
misunderstanding of
motivation.
what the job is.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, if I may, a little bit of good news. I was hearing about this young people having strokes thing, and that was kind of freaking me out a little
You're
bit.
like, what?
But they are working on new, very cheap, easy to make oximeters that you can buy just like a thermometer, so you can check your oxygen concentration every day, just like you would in the hospital with the little thing on the end of your finger.
And those are available. My husband actually bought one of those. It arrived in the mail. They're not, I think that there's a run on them at the moment, so they might not be easy to come by. But
so, like Justin, you were talking about something that the powers that be could potentially do here is distribute them to the masses. That would be helpful, since if you're completely asymptomatic and then bam, you have a stroke, like that's really it would be nice to be able to track it. So
be able to track your oxygen levels and know if you're within normal ranges. That would be great. Yeah,
because every day it's like, am I short of breath because of anxiety, or is it because I'm infected?
It's anxiety because I'm just holding my breath now and not breathing anymore. I find myself gasping for air. I'm like, oh yeah, this is me not breathing while I'm scrolling through social media.
Everybody's walking into public places as if they've walked into the worst public restroom they've ever entered before.
I know. I've been doing that too when I walk by people that like aren't distancing properly or aren't wearing masks. So I'll go. And I'm like, this isn't doing anything. The virus can still get at my nose.
No, you're doing good. I would say just keep that up, but don't keep it up so long that you pass out.
Right.
Because then that person who you walked by not wanting to share space with might have to give you mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and then it's even worse.
Yeah, that's not great. Oh, there's so many things, everybody. We can get through this together. I found a great article just published in Nature. Yes, by staying apart. Great article published in Nature. I'm going to post in the show notes on twis.org. I'll post the link. It's just a wonderful review article on how what we know about COVID-19 right now and how it infects different tissues and the effects it has on the body. It's very, it's science-y. If you want to read a science-y article, it's a good one. But yes, let's get through this together. Wash your hands at least 20 seconds. Try to do that every time you go to the bathroom, every time you're going to cook food. Try and monitor. If you get concerned about things, wash your hands more often. That's okay. And additionally, let's start wearing masks and put them on correctly when we're in public spaces so that we can protect other people.
Yeah.
I went to the store the other day and I saw maybe 5 people wearing the mask here,
under their nose,
over their face, under their nose. Like,
oh no!
You have to pretend that you're Dracula. You're going to cover your whole face with
my
a mask.
favorite metaphor for masks, actually, lately, I saw it circulating a bunch today, was if nobody's wearing pants and somebody pees on you, you get wet immediately. If you're wearing pants and somebody pees on you, then you'll get a little wet, but not as wet if you weren't wearing pants. But if they try to pee on you and they're wearing pants and you're wearing pants, you won't get any pee on you at all.
Okay. So now we know why everybody wears pants.
That's pretty accurate. Like that's exactly it, right? Like the mask doesn't do a whole lot to keep you from getting something from somebody else, but it does a lot keeping you from giving it to somebody else. Yes. And so it's just a social contract we all have to enter into now.
And that's where they switched. That's when they switched to everybody wear the mask, because at first it was like, you're not going to prevent yourself from getting it. This is the thing that they always talk about. This is, if you're sick, you put the mask on, but if you don't have it, then you shouldn't be wearing it. Now they're like, well, actually, if everybody wears it, that's going to knock it down, just like you're saying, without getting pee on each other.
Yes, exactly.
Stop peeing on each other, people.
Yes, that's right. Wear a mask.
What's wrong with What society come to?
Stop peeing
Now,
on each other.
unfortunately,
Wear a
unfortunately, now
mask.
we're gonna have a lot of people wearing masks the wrong
In the
way.
wrong places entirely.
Just a really big mask that covers from here all the way down.
Right. Yes. Okay. All right. Moving on. Let's move away from COVID and into the other worlds of science. There's so much out there. Justin, tell me about something you want to talk about.
I will tell you about something I want to talk about. An international team of researchers has pieced together new insights into Neanderthals based on pieces of Neanderthal genome left in the current modern humans of Iceland. The researchers found the new puzzle pieces by fishing around in the genomes of some 27,000 Icelanders. I guess they have a giant database there. The most interesting thing to me in this is they discovered that Neanderthal women gave birth later in life than the current modern humans, Homo sapien women at the time, and that Neanderthal men became fathers when they were younger than the Homo sapiens of their time, of around 50,000 years ago. So that's sort of interesting because that's not quite enough to say that Neanderthals had a matriarchal society, but that is something you would absolutely expect to see in a matriarchal society. Right? That would be something that would totally make sense. Which we don't have that's not what the research says, but I thought that was a very interesting possible insight. And this was Neanderthal women 100,000 to 50,000 years ago, becoming mothers much later in life. It's so interesting. So one of the other things that was sort of there's genes that are in this Neanderthal. They were managed to actually put together about half of a Neanderthal genome in these 27,000 individuals with different snippets and pieces that they could pull out and identify as Neanderthal. There's properties in those genes that they think have slightly lower risks of prostate cancer, lower levels of hemoglobin, and also better, faster blood plasma clotting at the same time. Slightly and very slightly lower body length. It was only millimeters, so that was sort of interesting. But yeah, they also found traces of Denisovin DNA. And they thought that was curious because the Denisovin interaction with humans is typically seen, far Southeast Asia. It's not sort of considered to be the Neanderthals were the European sort of contingent at this point. So part of it could be ancient humans traveling into territories populated by Denisovans and then eventually ending up in Northern Europe and heading over to Iceland. But it's also sort of curious too, because the way they look at it, it was either Denisovan or Neanderthal. Partly the Denisovans could have intermingled with the Neanderthals, and that's how the Denisovan got in there. But based on something that we're talking about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think, it kind of is starting to look like Denisovans and Neanderthals might have been the same thing at one point, and were separated for hundreds of thousands of years and then intermingled too. So it might be harder to suss a Neanderthal from a Denisovan than we think it is.
I think that's a really interesting question. Like, if we can't tease them apart, what are we looking at?
Yeah, so we can if they're calling it Denisovan, it definitely sounds like they've pulled something that they've gotten from the Denisovan traces in places that we have it attributed to. But it is still highly possible that what is being attributed to Denisovan is also in contingents of Neanderthals. It could be more of a shared genome, much more similar, maybe than we think, because they might have the same origin leaving Africa. We're very similar in time scale there at this point, and then the split.
They just went one went left and one went right.
kind of what it looks like, yeah. And then they met in the middle a bunch of times. So yeah, I think the interesting part, though, to me definitely was the fact that they could suss out that the mothers were giving birth later in life, and that has, and you also start. They
waited until after they finished high school.
Yeah. and the Neanderthals also, we know, cared for their sick. They had individuals who were absolutely physically unable to care for themselves, having lost limbs or become blind from head injuries, because it was a brutal life of, they apparently have never found a Neanderthal without broken bones that healed at some point in their life. So it was a pretty rough existence. So the idea that we have then Neanderthals that can live well into their 40s and with injuries, meaning they're cared for by the
they
community.
had medicine. Remember, you told us they had medical care.
And why did they have medical care? Because women were in charge.
No, it kind of fits. No, doesn't it? It kind of fits. Like, if the women are in charge, we're going to care for people a little bit more. We're going to be a little bit more thoughtful about these things. And so, now I'm starting to wonder,
where has coronavirus been eradicated officially? A country with a female prime minister. New Zealand, yeah. And so I've been watching a lot of Star Trek while I've been stuck at home. And I just saw an episode of Deep Space Nine where a new species shows up and they're like, oh, no. Women are in charge. Men are too emotional and irrational and make snap decisions. The women, they got it.
I'm
there we go. I love it.
Pretty good.
But it also says, like,
I'm just saying, I'm all for looking at Neanderthals like the Neanderthals are a matriarchal society. I'm all for changing that story.
Yeah, well, if you go back and you look at what does that look like in other apes. We look at the bonobo is really the best example we have of a matriarchal society. Or we can even look to those. We talked about it a while ago. The forest troop baboons that the males all got killed off by tuberculosis or something awful, or the aggressive males did, and so there was these large population of females that sort of took charge, and they changed the way that culture of baboons interacted.
Lemurs are matriarchal. Really... That's like where all primates came from. It's from a common ancestor with lemurs. So
maybe we start to start to look for those signs of possible matriarchal society within the Neanderthals.
I like it. Genes. I think it's amazing that just looking at genes could potentially lead us in this direction and start telling us this story.
It's like tree rings.
It's like tree rings. I was just thinking the same thing.
The tree rings of humans.
If you just tuned in, you are listening to This Week in Science. And if you're interested in a TWIS shirt or mug or other item of TWIS merchandise goodness, head over to twis.org and click on that Zazzle link. You can browse our store and buy something. It helps support this show. All right, it is time now for Blair's Animal Corner. Oh, if I've turned this up, it'll work.
She loves our creatures, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. If you want to hear about animals, she's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. There's Animal Corner.
What you got, Blair?
I have a virus.
No.
In bees, though. In bees.
In bees.
In bees. Honeybee virus. Okay, so...
bees? Well, that's going to be tough. They don't social distance well.
No, they don't. And in fact, when honeybees are infected by a virus, they might actually be better at spreading it than if they were just a normal healthy bee. They might actually have completely different tactics for moving around. So this is looking at how a very particular infection, IAPV, totally lost what that stands for, but I'll find it in a second. But they alter the honeybee's behavior and physiology in order to actually boost the virus's ability to spread. It is Israeli acute paralysis virus.
Ooh.
So they actually increase the likelihood that they will also be accepted by foreign colonies. So the first step of this is it turns out that this virus actually makes them more likely to lose their way. So the virus makes them get lost, so they can't return to their home from a foraging trip. And that way, when they stumble across a new hive, it's very easy for them to spread this virus further. Then somehow they are able to circumvent the guards of these foreign colonies that would normally keep bees that are not part of the family out. And so the virus is doing very specific things to help aid the spread. The way that researchers figured this out is by tagging each bee with the equivalent of a QR code and continuously monitoring their interactions in beekeeping operations. So they were able to kind of keep a very close eye on them. They tracked around 900 bees and their movements. So in order to understand how they kind of watched how the bees acted, you have to understand something that bees do called trophallaxis, which is where honeybees exchange regurgitated food and other liquids. Just some very nice mouth to mouth. They use it to share food with each other. They use it to share hormones and other signaling molecules. And that can in turn affect physiology and behavior of bees. They touch mouth parts, they touch antenna, and they do this with hundreds of other bees each day. So thinking about our current kind of re-examining of the handshake, this kind of brings it into a whole nother realm. So this trade, as it were, is essential to the spread of information and nutrition throughout a hive, but it does also allow for infections to transmit very quickly. The infected bees in this study were compared with bees that had their immune systems stimulated to mimic infection. So they could just see, is this just something that happens when a bee is sick in general, or is it specifically this virus? And both the infected bees and the ones who were simulating infection had overall less trophallaxis experiences than their healthy counterparts, just in their normal hive. So they appeared to be trading mouth stuff less. Sorry, I can't figure out a less gross way to say that. The infected bees, however, were just as mobile as other bees, and so they weren't sluggish. They didn't act particularly sick, and so the researchers think that the change in behavior, the reduction in trophallaxis, is just a general response to a health threat not related to this virus. What gets interesting with the specific response to the virus is, remember, the bees were getting lost easier.
Yeah.
And so then when they place these honeybees at the entrance of a foreign hive, infected bees suddenly amped up the trophallaxis with the guards. They were just offering up all of the regurgitated food. And so the guards are more likely to admit them than healthy strange bees. So it seemed like they were being bribed. I don't know.
Bee bribes. I
Yeah,
get it. Yeah.
I don't. Or
Come on,
confused. Who knows?
I'll give you a little honey.
Yeah, Then researchers analyzed the chemistry of the hydrocarbons in the bees' exoskeletons and discovered distinct hydrocarbon profiles for healthy bees, for IPV-infected bees, and for immunostimulated bees. So there's something chemically happening inside the bees in each of these cases. And so they actually think that the virus is changing how the bees smell. And so the infected bees might be behaving in a way that is appeasing the guards. Basically, they're just like trying to confuse them. Like,
They're
here,
just-
take
they're-
all this
they're-
food. Ah, I'm gone already.
But they act like a honeypot. They're giving up the mouth regurgitation. Maybe they smell like, oh, I'm confusing, but don't look at me anymore, and then they run away into the hive.
Right. So
But they're lost, so they just think they're going home, but they're not. So it's
this virus not only encourages them to spread the virus itself by making them lost and making them go to new hives, but then somehow this virus has found out a way to induce behavior that will keep guard bees from seeing that something's up. So
right. Mm-hmm.
there's multi-level deception happening here to help spread this virus.
I think that's a little bit heavy to put on a single protein.
But viruses,
With
they're alive.
They're not alive, but
I don't know.
we
They
don't-
check
and-
a few of those boxes, but not all of them. And I have a hard time with protein
What?
intelligence.
So
Well,
this is
it's
this
not
is the thing,
But
though.
with the-
What
It's
is
not
intelligence?
It's
Yeah.
selection. So
Yes.
there was a chemical reaction at some point that made it easier for this stuff to be transmitted, and therefore it was retained.
That's all
So
it
it is
is.
still
So-
a benefit that the virus
Oh
is
yeah.
receiving.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
this is, if nothing else, is proof of it. To me, it looks like some sort of adaptive radiation occurred, and there was a beneficial strategy and a less beneficial strategy, which means there's some sort of evolution taking place within these viruses that is very specific to spreading amongst honeybees.
And it's and it's the evolution
whatever
of
works.
the evolution of the virus and the host as well together. So how do their chemical systems work together, right? So how does this protein package, it's not potentially just there are viruses of multiple sizes. We don't know exactly I don't know what this virus consists of.
No.
But it could have instructions that get in the way of the bees' navigational system. Bees are well known for having a fairly complex navigational system. That's what they do. They navigate. And so it might still, even though it's a complex system, might not be that hard to put a molecule in there that blocks that somehow.
Right.
And maybe that's one thing. And potentially a signaling cascade. One molecule can create a signaling cascade within the cells of a host to create a multitude of effects from just one little switch being turned on or off. And so we don't know what's going on there exactly, but it is the interplay between the virus and the host and the evolution between them over a very long time.
And I think
it would probably have
that
to
I
do with
think
what
is so-
cell tissue is getting attacked and targeted by the virus. That then would have to be causing that cascade. I don't see the viruses creating a molecule that's doing other work.
Bees don't have the same immune response that people do. They're not going to have the same response, and it depends on the virus what the immune response is going to look like.
But this is something interesting, though. Is there a point when they stopped naming viruses after where they came from? Because there's been a bunch of pushback about trying to call this the Wuhan or the China. And here we have like the Israeli virus. The Hunta is from a forest. West Nile even doesn't make sense because it's in California. And then Lyme disease is a town in somewhere in the Midwest or something in the South.
Yeah, do we need to start giving them human names like storms?
No, because Corona
this is Virus
almost
Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Virus Beth. This is Fred.
But I'm not opposed to naming them where they came from. Although it becomes then you would have to rename them if they're coming from somewhere else more. So this would now have to be the Big Apple virus. So it does get silly at a point. But knowing where viruses come from is a way of tracking. It's sort of like not counting the residents of Florida. If you don't point out where the origin is, then you have less impetus to put funds into monitoring and testing in those places where you see them.
Yeah.
But I think is there a time when they stopped doing that? When they stopped using the origin point?
I don't
Okay.
know.
I'm looking at that.
I don't know.
I don't
Maybe
know.
the chat room can Google it.
Yeah, is it like animals where if you discover a virus, you get to name it, and the people who discover viruses are just a lot less creative? I don't know.
I don't think that is the case
I
necessarily.
think there was a tradition of calling it where it was.
But I think, Justin, to your point again about the intelligence of the protein, this is really sticking in my brain a little bit because, your argument tonight that a virus with just a little bit of protein that it could do blah, 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 blah. Well, once upon a time, there was a little bit of protein. There was a little bit of RNA or DNA, and these molecules just started doing computational things and changing things in their environment in ways that allowed them, these molecules started interacting with their environment in ways that allowed them to survive. And now we have multicellular life and intelligence in humans. So you can have what we would potentially call intelligent, but it's molecular computation. It is interactions between molecules at its most basic level, and it's those interactions with molecules. Some work, some don't. Some lead to changes that down the road can have something that looks like what we would call intelligence, but it's, we don't prescribe that kind of a driving force behind it.
Wait a second. You're arguing my point. That's what I was saying.
No,
this bee's got a million viruses. This one just happened to work in this way. It wasn't strategy. It's just attrition. And yes, there's evolution.
But you didn't
taking place,
say that.
That's what that was my argument. Absolutely. I was objecting to the anthropomorphization or the idea that there was intelligent strategy at work.
I feel like we need to rewind the tape, but I definitely don't think.
If I was insufficiently articulate, I apologize.
What? And anyway, I'm reminded of a professor I had that was very adamantly. He would often point out that a bad parasite kills its host or gets its host very sick. A good parasite goes almost unnoticed. And so there are a lot of viruses out there that survive and replicate and continue and don't kill their host. And there are a lot of bacteria out there that kill their host. And so I think there's also, if you want to call it smart or not, that's, a whole nother thing. But is it effective at doing what it needs to do?
Yeah, and I think that's what happens when you have something like switches species. Like this COVID-19 is probably fine in bats. They probably don't get fevers. They probably don't end up on respirators. They probably don't die from it. It's just one of the viruses that a bat can have in its system. Might even be a symbiotic relationship in some way. Might do some function for a bat that we're unaware of. But now it's in a human, which is completely different evolutionary machinery, and it's causing havoc. Not because
left
it's
unchecked,
good or bad,
this virus might not do well.
It's flipping switches, and it's having different outcomes. Yeah. Flipping the same switches, but having completely different outcomes because the switches are connected in different ways. But it's not like it's like.
I'm going to flip this switch and ask Blair, to go on to her next
Before
story.
you move on, Dr. Kiki, I believe Blair has another story.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So this is, sometimes I bring stories to the corner about us attempting to mimic amazing animal adaptations in a lab for our own use, and this is one of those. So this is looking at cribellate spiders. I looked it up how to pronounce it before the show started, and I already forgot. But it is spiders that spin nanofibers into sticky threads, and the way that they do that is they actually have kind of a comb-like structure on their back legs that allows them to kind of hold on to and thread and move these nanofibers. And in order for scientists to figure out how this worked, they actually shaved the structure off of some spiders and watched what happened. And there was a huge buildup of nanofibers where the comb should have been. And then they attempted to make this in a lab to be able to manipulate nanofibers in a lab. So they used an anti-adhesive nanostructure on a foil surface and made this kind of comb to be able to handle nanofibers in a laboratory setting. So it's quite the almost microscopic structure that allows for something that I didn't even realize these spiders were doing. The fact that they're kind of organized. It's almost like when you hold the yarn for your grandma while she's knitting between your two arms. They're able to kind of move and manipulate these nanofibers at the back of their legs with the combs. And so they are able to handle these sticky, delicate structures easily. Yeah. They use lasers to pattern the nanostructures into polyethylene terephthalate, PET foils. And then they coated the foils with gold.
For a second, I thought you meant that they gave lasers to spiders.
Maybe cool. Someday. We can hope. When everyone's allowed to go back to their labs again, hopefully some people throw caution to the wind and try some real science.
Why have we never thought of that?
Yeah, so these artificial combs with gold foil laser etched nanostructures performed almost as well as the combs on the spiders, but there's
little gold
now
ripples.
We know there's in a lab somewhere there are little spiders just covered in sticky nanofibers going like, what is this?
What am I supposed to be doing now?
For science.
For science. Comb. Spider combs for science.
Oh, I like this in the chat room in YouTube. Nord says, so what do you do for a living? Oh, I just shave spider legs.
Yep, that's
perfect.
somebody's answer for truth. Oh my goodness. And Gaurav Sharma says the World Health Organization made rules not to name diseases after places and people since May 2015, Justin. So our chat room did Google the answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gaurav.
Very well done. Thank you for that. Because I had a feeling that must have been the case. Because everything had a place name, and then they started arguing that we shouldn't call anything by place for the new novels. So perfectly well answered. Thank you.
Perfectly well. All right, I got some underwater bones.
Because because you point out MERS is the worst. Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. Like that was like all of them were like really that MERS wasn't that long ago. Was it before 2015? I felt like it was more recently. I'm sorry, I'm going.
Nope. Stop the tangents. It's almost 10 o'clock. Let's finish this show. We'll get through the rest of our stories. It is time for our quick science news. I have underwater bones. My bones aren't underwater, but I have a story. Ooh, researchers are trying to figure out better ways to determine how long corpses have been underwater. Because how do you know?
Tree rings.
Tree ring? No.
Yeah.
Proteins proteins. That's what they're doing. Published in the ACS Journal of Proteome Research. A group of researchers, Noemi Procopio and colleagues, published their analysis of proteins to investigate the post-mortem submerged interval. PMSI, that's their acronym for it, for the amount of time that a body has been underwater. So in case you didn't know that before, now you know if there's a TV forensic drama when they're talking about the PMSI, it's the post-mortem submerged interval. Bones are strong.
It's that time of night.
And they support your body. And they allow you to have contact points for your muscles. They actually hold minerals such as calcium that breaks down and then is transplanted throughout the body. Bones are where your blood is
made. They get soggy
What?
if they're in water too long, right? Like you'd poke.
Bones,
It'd be like if you put a
Bones
little
are
bread in the
good.
water, get nice and squishy.
it's good to have bones. They're one of the most important mineral storage organs in your body. Did you know that you have red marrow and yellow marrow? That red marrow is constantly making blood vessels, but the yellow marrow only kicks on to make blood vessels if you've been bleeding a lot. Very interesting. Isn't it?
That's why sometimes.
Anyway, what were you saying about bones?
No, Kiki, I have a legit question about the story.
You have a legit question about underwater bones.
Yes.
Go.
As I think about forensic scientists normally look at things like maggots and other biota that would live in or on a corpse. There are things like bone worms and things like that in the ocean, right? So is that part of this too?
It is part of it, but this is a different part of it because there are bacteria and scavengers that can actually make the PMSI difficult to estimate. PMSI, did you hear me describe that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. Good. Good.
It's how squishy the bones are.
No, yes, I guess in effect, right. How do you find out? Squeeze the bones. No, you don't squeeze the bones, literally. The researchers determined that there are proteins, specifically a protein called fructose biphosphate aldolase A, that decreased in bone the longer that the bones were in water. And in pond water, they determined that a protein called fettuin A was more likely to be deamidated. It's a chemical modification that removes an amine than in other types of water, which is really interesting that pond water would have a different effect on molecules than, say, freshwater or seawater or lake water. And so they named a whole bunch of molecules, proteins like these that could be biomarkers to use for the study and estimation of dead bodies in bodies of water. So looking at dead bodies in the water, and then other researchers are looking at the center of the earth, but not literally looking at the center of the earth. They were modeling the center of the earth by taking a really teeny tiny 10 micron piece of iron and shoving it between two diamond anvils at pressures up to 116 gigapascals and temperatures induced by an infrared laser at 4,350 Kelvin, and turning it into liquid iron and using X-ray scattering to measure how dense it was. That's what other researchers were doing. And when they did that, they determined that the density of this liquid iron in their experiments was not the same as the estimated density of the iron in the Earth's outer core. The iron in the lab was 7.5% more dense, which suggests that the outer core of the Earth's core is not just iron, that there's something else in it. An element lighter than iron is probably in the outer core.
Interesting. We have some story of that. We leak that iron. like it leaches up, and sometimes can even come out with the volcanoes and such. But we found evidence of this really deep iron spitting up onto the surface at different points. Yeah, so we're a little leaky too. We're like a
little leaky
spongy
planet.
bone that's been in the
We
water.
should be
for a long
wearing
time.
pants.
We should all be. Aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, well then.
I really
so
hope so.
am I, maybe.
I'm wearing pants.
Good. That makes
Good
three of us.
Good job,
But no, I just imagine
professionals.
nobody in our audience is wearing pants at any
That's
time.
good.
So
And that's fine. They don't need to.
no.
All right, Justin, what stories do you have?
I'm gonna have at least one story. My other one is like not pulling. Oh, here we go. 85 million year old giant shark fossil found off the coast of Spain. Might have been a teenager. It's a shark vertebrate that they found, and because of the way that the size of it and the way that it's grown, they can tell that it wasn't done growing, even though it's already a giant. This is according to Patrick L. Jimbura, who's the lead author of the study. Based on the model, we calculated a size of 4 to 7 meters and an age of 30 years for the examined shark. Now, I know 30 years, you're thinking not a teenager. Astonishing about this data is the fact that this shark was not yet mature when it died, despite its rather old age. Sharks follow an asymptomatic growth curve, meaning that they grow constantly until they mature. And after that, the growth curve flattens, resulting from a reduced growth rate. However, this shark doesn't show any signs of flattening or inflections of the growth profile, meaning that it was not mature, a teenager, if you want. This suggests that these sharks grew even much larger and older. That's a 21-footish. That is a teenager. That's already getting into like whale territory for this thing. That's a big shark.
So
That's huge.
Sharks take a long time to reach sexual maturity, even now. So great white sharks, males are in their 20s, females are in their 30s when they reach sexual maturity. So that's one of the problems with shark conservation, is that when they're hunted, sometimes you end up taking animals out that haven't yet reproduced, and then that has a huge impact on the population. So it's kind of a weird life strategy that messes up their role in the ecological space.
Yeah, so it's a great strategy to get this big. So you are the apex predator. Not a lot of things can attack you, and you are a successful hunter. You can eat anything of just about any size in the water. But yeah, if it takes you that long to get there, and there's a big ecological change or shift or human fishing, hunting, culling, it can also rapidly decimate.
Yeah. You can see how if you're already over 10 feet, you can take your time getting to sexual maturity because nothing's trying to eat you. So you're kind of like, I'll get there when I get there. It's going to be fine.
I want
But
you all
good
to
luck
know.
finding a bathtub long enough.
Yeah, good luck with that. I looking at this image though, I just want everyone to know that shark vertebrae rings, growth rings, look just like tree rings.
There you go.
Just bringing it back full
Very
circle.
interesting.
Look just like tree rings. I wonder what else we can learn about their growth from
Oh,
those rings.
speaking of vertebrae, my little story to finish out the show is about a teeny tiny animal called a hero shrew, and they're vertebrae. They're small grayish brown mammals. They're related to moles, hedgehogs. They look kind of like rats, but they're not. And they have interlocking backbones that make their spines insanely strong. There is a theory or folktale or what have you out there that a fully grown man could stand on the back of this tiny little shrew and they'd be fine because of their reinforced backbone.
What?
We don't know why. We do not know why they have this weird backbone. And so some new research looking at CT scans of shrew spines helped kind of figure out why they have it and what they might use it for. So Stephanie Smith, a postdoctoral researcher at the Field Museum at the University of Chicago, was the lead author on this paper. And so she compared 2 species of hero shrew and a normal shrew, looked at their backs, and specifically looked at how the wear and tear on these bones indicate what those bones were up to before. So these animals are pretty much impossible to observe in the wild. And so they're having to deal with museum specimens that are long dead. So they kind of have to look at the bones and see what's happening with the proteins to figure out what has happened. They look at different pressure change angles on them. And so she said, the reason I brought this story is that this woman is amazing. She says, my absolute favorite example of this type of study was a paper where they put sheep in tall shoes like high heels, and the different angle of pressure changed the inner structure of the leg bones. So they were able to do that by looking at the shrews. It looks like...
Did they put the shrews in high heels?
No, they just looked at their bones. But it looks like a previous theory from 2013 that shrews might be going into a leaf structure and kind of pushing it out to open it up to get to grubs is likely what's happening because of the way that the spine, it looks like it arches and then stretches out. So it doesn't completely solve the question of what they're doing, but it looks like that would fit. So it might all be so they can scrunch up like an inchworm and stretch back out to push apart palm trunks to get at bugs. And so she says,
strong,
quote, shrews are really interesting ecologically. They're so small. They have almost secret powers. They're incredibly diverse, and I think they're beautiful. They're dope as hell. So if you take nothing else out of this show from the Animal Corner tonight, I want you to remember that shrews are dope as hell.
I think that's great.
So, also,
that's a t-shirt.
If that's what the kids are saying, today, the Spinosaurus is getting a little bit of a revamp. Spinosaurus has got that big, it's a dinosaur with the big
another spine. This is a show full of spines.
Yeah, a big spiny fin on the back. It's got really wide feet. It's they knew it was a kind of a big predator, but then they knew it like ate fish and stuff. They've discovered a pretty intact tail that also has a fin-like structure and an absolute ability to do lateral movement. They now realize this thing was a swimmer. This dinosaur could chase after fish, not just wait for one to, come up close and then take a bite out of it, but could actually jump in the water and pursue things in the rivers. So that's a pretty big change. Up till now, we really haven't had a lot of reports of dinosaurs heading to the sea. It's
just
big reptiles. There's big reptiles in the sea, but there's not a lot of dinosaurs that were
plesiosaur. I think
that were able to go back and forth. Yeah.
I think that's the most interesting part, is that ability to go back and forth, to dive in and be functionally set up to give chase underwater and then or up on land, or to be a sit and wait predator up on land looking to see what's down below in the waters and then jumping in and diving after it.
And then this is a super quick story. I'm just going to mention this one. I'll put the link in there if somebody wants to read more. We talked about the Calusa people with the big shell mounds, and they had the big fish fisheries in Florida.
Yeah.
There's a fort that they've been looking for. There's a fort that was Fort San Anton de Carlos, which was one of the first Jesuit missions in North America. It was built in 1566. I guess it was lost, which was interesting because it was named after the Catholic patron saint of lost things. So there was a little bit of irony to the fact that they couldn't figure out what happened to this fort. So that kingdom of the Calusa that we were talking about that they've been asking about, turns out it's like right in the middle of it. They built this fort right in. And so what happened to the Calusa people? Spanish came in, gave them diseases, probably treated them poorly. The Calusa fled. A bunch of them ended up in Cuba. And then they lived together probably for a while. Then they split. The Calusas left. And then soon after that, apparently the Spanish settlers who had moved there couldn't maintain anything of sustenance. They were getting fed fish from these big fisheries. The Calusa people leave.
There's no
the
fisheries.
Aren't working. And they're like, oh, yeah, there's no natural other food source around here. And so they had to leave too. But that's where it was. Right there in the middle of the kingdom of the Calusa.
The kingdom of the Calusa.
Mm-hmm.
That's neat. That's a really interesting tie together there. I like that. Researchers discovered what they think is the most dangerous place in Earth's history. It's an area in it's a studied deposit of Cretaceous rock on the edge of the Sahara Desert. It was an ancient stomping ground for dinosaurs. And then the Kem group in eastern Morocco is also what is the area specifically that they think might have been the most dangerous place in Earth's history, the most dangerous time and place to have been alive, because that's where they found the largest number of large-bodied carnivores in the fossil record. And there's a prevalence of carnivores, a scarcity of herbivores, and it's been found nowhere else.
Can you have a biome of just carnivores eating other carnivores?
Yeah.
Doesn't somebody need to be the bottom of the food chain? Like somebody has to be taking energy from plants. You can't just have carnivores eating carnivores. That can't be sustainable.
I don't think it's sustainable. I think it's a very boom or bust situation, but I think you could do it for short term.
Yeah, there's a review that's been recently published and putting what they say it's a window into Africa's age of dinosaurs, suggesting that the Kem group, the Kem beds, actually encompasses two distinct fossil-rich sites that they're calling the Gara Spa and the Upper Duwira formations, exhibiting a range of dinosaurs and pterosaurs, crocodilians, turtles, fish remains, various invertebrates and plants and other fossils. But it really is an overabundance of theropods. The presence of four of them: Abelisaurids, Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, Carcharodontosaurus saharicus, and Deltadromeus agilis. And usually there's only like one or two, but they had a lot. A lot. I don't know why. Pretty exciting, but I don't want to live there. I just had to get that story in because I saw it and it was neat. And we were talking about bones and dinosaurs.
And Spinosaurus.
The Spinosaurus, we got to throw this in here because this is fun. I'm glad I wasn't alive then or there. No, that's good. That's good. Have we made it to the end of the show?
I think we have.
Mm-hmm.
What we have gotten here. We've come to the end of the show. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please share it with a friend. I'd love to give our shout outs now to the friends of the show, Fada for his help with social media and show notes, Gord for manning the chat room, ID4 for recording the show, and I would love to thank the Burroughs Welcome Fund and our Patreon sponsors for their generous support. Thank you to Paul Disney, Andrew Swanson, Stu Pollock, Ed Dyer, Craig Landon, Tony Steele, Alex Wilson, Steve DeBell, Joshua Fury, Ken Hayes, Philip Shane, Ed, Mark Massaros, Richard Porter, Brian Condren, Richard, Eric Knapp, Bill K, Jason Roberts, Matthew Litwin, Jack Bulb Calder, Dave Neighbor, EO, Byron Lee, Kevin Parachan, Matt Sutter, Aaron Luthen, Flying Out, Christopher Rappin, Brendan Minish, Greg Briggs, Robert, Gary S., Marjorie, Rudy Garcia, Kurt Larson, Steve Leisman, Sean Lamb, Greg Riley, Jim Drapeau, Lisa Suzuki, Christopher Dreyer, Brian Carrington, Jason Olds, John McKee, Paul Artyom, Ulysses Adkins, Kevin Reardon, Noodles, Dave Wilkinson, Sue Doster, Paul Ronovich, Daryl Myshak, Dave Friedel, John Ratnaswamy, Stephen Albaron, Seth O'Gradney, Mountain Sloth, Rodney Lewis, Sarah Chavis, Corinne Benton, John Gridley, Jean Tellier, Patrick Pecoraro, Darwin Hannon, Matt Bass, Dan K, Sarah Forfar, Donald Mundis, Howard Tan, Josiah Zahner, Taylor P.S., Ben Bignell, Maddie Perrin, Ashley Doyle, Mark Hessenflow, and John Atwood. Thank you for all of your support on Patreon, and for information, you can visit patreon.com/thisweekinscience, or just go to TWIS.org and click on the Patreon link. On next week's show,
we will be back on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific Time, broadcasting live from our YouTube and Facebook channels and from twist.org/live.
Hey, you've watched us. You want to listen to us as a podcast? Or you've listened to us, listen to us again as a podcast. Just search for This Week in Science wherever podcasts are found. If you enjoy the show, get your friends to subscribe as well.
For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes and links to stories will be available on our website, www.twist.org. And you can also sign up for our newsletter.
You can contact us directly. Email Kirsten at thisweekinscience.com, Justin at twistminion@gmail.com, or me, Blair, at blairbaz@twist.org. Just put twist, TWIS, somewhere in the subject line or your email. It's going to get spam filtered into oblivion.
You can also hit us up on the Twitter, where we are at Twist Science, at Dr. Kiki, at Jackson Fly, and at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, address, a suggestion for an interview, a haiku that comes to you tonight, please let us know.
We'll be back here next week, and we hope you'll join us again for more great science news.
And if you've learned anything from the show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science.
This Week in Science.
This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got one disclaimer, and it shouldn't be news, that what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculations and I've got a plan. If you listen to the science, you may just yet understand that we're not trying to threaten your philosophy. We're just trying to save the world from jeopardy. 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 And This Week in Science is coming your way. So everybody listen to everything we say. And if you use our method instead of rolling a die, we may rid the world of toxoplasma gondii. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 Got a laundry list of items I want to address, from stopping global hunger to dredging Loch Ness. I'm trying to promote more rational thought, and I'll try to answer any question you've got. So how can I ever see the changes I seek when I can only set up shop 1 hour a week? This Week in Science is coming your way. You better just listen to what we say, and if you've learned anything from the words that we've said, then please just remember it's all in your head. 'Cause it's This Week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 This week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 This week in 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 science.
It's the end of another show. I don't know where's Justin. He had to go. Somebody. Tell me nice things about the world.
Oof, that's a tough one.
Well, how are things? How's Sadie?
She's good. I've been running with her in the morning.
Oh, good.
So I think she's like finally, I don't want to jinx it, but I feel like she's finally potty trained, which is nice.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Feels like it's been forever.
Yeah. I found out the hard way that corgis are tough to potty train.
Because they're super smart.
Yeah. Also something about, I don't know how much scientific stock is in this, but I have heard that dogs with pointy ears this is sounding so silly.
Look at me. I just went.
I know. The dogs that don't have ears that are down because of the whole like domestication syndrome thing, which we talked about last week, might not be real. But
Yeah.
so ears up are supposed to have more like wolf leftovers in them, less like fully domesticated tendencies. And so that makes it harder for them to learn certain things like potty training. But I don't know how true that is. But I mean, it kind of makes sense because with the foxes in Russia, the ears went down when they were bred for friendliness and that kind of stuff. And a lot of working breeds have the ears. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
I don't know, man. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. I don't know. Point is, I
Point
haven't
is,
cleaned
she
up
took a
pee
long
in a
time.
while, so that's good.
That is good.
Yeah. But yeah, we've been running in the morning. That's been good. And then she sleeps for like half of my day as I work from home, which is nice. Yeah. And then I have lunch.
Do dogs normally sleep like cats? Like half the day?
Well, yeah. I mean, they sleep a lot. I think also like wild dogs are usually crepuscular, so they're a dawn and dusk variety.
Right.
So, but yeah, they definitely sleep more. They don't sleep as much as cats, but they sleep a lot. And there's often the mantra, a tired dog is a happy dog.
That's true.
So, and I can't take her to the dog park to socialize, so I got to get her zoomies out some other way. So I'm running her.
Get those zoomies.
Yeah.
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 Run
And
the dogs.
Brian's doing good. ER's still not full, which is good. It's his birthday this weekend.
ER's full?
It's not full.
It's not full.
Which is
Okay.
good. Yes.
That is very good.
Yes.
Let's keep it that way.
Yeah. No, the Bay Area, I think, has done a really, really good job so far.
Yeah.
Although they're saying that they're going to start opening stuff up in the summer, and they've talked about July school, which I think is insane.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
It's I don't think it'll happen because of teachers unions.
Yeah. I mean,
Because technically teachers are working right now.
Right. Just start school in September or end of August, whatever you had planned. Just forget it. I mean,
Yeah, it's fine. It's really
forget it.
fine.
I don't
This
think
is.
I
I was
would
talking
want
to my
to
parents about this. Like,
send Kai back to school in July.
it's
Ew.
kids today. Here we go. Kids today are learning on a very different level than I did in the same grade. So they're already accelerated from where we used to be. Kids are expected to start kindergarten being able to write letters and like with the
Yeah.
vestiges of reading happening. And when I went into
Yeah.
kindergarten, we would spend a whole day on a letter, and my homework would be to go home and practice writing the letter 100 times. Like,
Kindergarten was Play-Doh.
exactly. So
Wow.
I understand that there might be a short-term hit from this, but especially since teachers are currently working, I don't see how we could start school in the middle of the summer. That seems crazy.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
My preschool introduced me to Aldous Huxley for the first time.
Oh yeah, Animal Farm.
No, it's not Animal Farm.
Oh,
He wrote a children's book though. He did write a
Oh.
children's book, and that's the first. And so, but I've been here for a little. Hey, the foxtrot study. One of the things with that, they have determined why the puppification of the foxes over time had to do with, because those foxes mothers were more relaxed. It was release of hormones were different in vitro when they were relaxed, and that was what led to that cascade. So, a puppy or a dog that likes to sleep a lot, that feels very relaxed in its environment, will only look more puppy-like in the next generation, sort of a thing. That was one of the big determinations they made for why that was taking place. They were more relaxed. They had different hormone balances, and so the offspring. It also affected coloration a lot as well.
Yeah.
And it affected lighter coloration to a great extent too, which is interesting because then a long time ago I correlated this possibly to why animals in the Arctic got white fur. Now there's natural selection at play obviously as well, but if you have great distances, you're not in a jungle where there's predator prey on a daily nightly relationship. You can imagine much more relaxed sort of birthing of pups or rabbits or foxes or whatever it is. And that hormone change can also lead to lighter coloration, which then is accelerated by natural selection because that becomes beneficial. The thing with the hospitals in San Francisco is one of those things that they are talking about opening up things because and maybe I think it might be less so now if we actually can get a vaccine by fall, but they're worried about that second round. And if you have hospital capacity that's at 20% or 30%, you still want it to be in the 80% range. Now, assuming that this strategy is also assuming that you can become resistant to it a second time around. So there's a lot of unknowns here. But the idea would be is if you can become immune to it by going through it, you want higher capacity in the hospitals so that you get more people through the hospital system when the hospital system is not stressed and not all at once again at some point later. So there's this really
right. But if I may, the Bay Area is increasingly young. And if young people are not exhibiting normal symptoms, they might not be going in at all. So we don't actually know what COVID levels are. And that's kind of the weird thing, right? Is because San Francisco in particular, the age demographics have completely skewed since all of the latest tech stuff happened, that could be impacting this in relation to the rest of the state as well. So it's not necessarily indicative of the rest of the state, what's happening in the Bay Area. I would like it to be, but we don't necessarily know that.
Yeah, one of the things with the Bay Area is very close to me. It's very, very close. I would prefer if y'all just stayed shut down, because doing fine out here in the sticks with the chicken, which is actually hilarious. Because I now have a pet. I have a pet rooster. I told you this last week.
You made it. Your
What's his name?
Well, it's had a couple. First, I called him Curious. He was a curious rooster because I'd be working on the school bus, and
you should call him Rum Tum Tugger.
And then I started feeding him, And then I realized, okay, he's clever. So I renamed him Clever. And then I noticed, even though I think we did talk about it, even though he's the biggest rooster on the farm, the other roosters chase him off. Smaller roosters he runs. So then I changed his name to Rabbit. He keeps running because there's rabbits out there too. And as soon as they see anything, they run.
Rabbit.
They're just like, I'm out of here.
Mhm.
But this rooster like runs from all the other roosters. He's sort of doing his own COVID self-isolation. He's got this one little tree with shade that he hangs out at the bus if he sees me. Now he's just incessant. He sees me, he follows me everywhere.
Right. How's Kai doing, Kiki?
Oh.
Okay. Next topic.
I think it must be really hard to be 9 and have your parents telling you what to do all the time. And
seems like a real tough time.
We're having technology issues because all of the schooling is on technology, and then he wants to do his free time on technology, and then I try to get him to go outside or do anything that does not involve technology, and it's like he doesn't know how, and he throws tantrums now. He's mad all the time. Like he was mad at us all day long today.
I've seen a lot about that because
bad.
School is screen time.
Everything is screen time.
It's way harder now. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been talking to a bunch of parents who are saying like they're having aggression issues in their kids, and like it's a thing. I'm like, oh my God.
I saw a comic today about what it's like for kids right now, and it was 2 gray clouds with a rainbow in the middle, and on one side it said shut down, and on the other side it said blow up, and then it said like happy medium in the rainbow. And I was like, yeah, that seems right.
So there's a lot of this going around. A very good friend of mine, his oldest daughter, started college this past year. And it was time. She was ready to leave, strike out on her own. She got the dorm at the college and had the car, had freedom. Got to that point where, we all remember that day when you were like, freedom! Woo!
Yeah.
And then midway through the school year, had to come move home again. That's rough. My 12-year-old is 13.
Your 12-year-old is 13?
Yeah, my 12 says you get lost.
He keeps
in the
getting
years.
older.
Yeah. Sebastian's 17. No. He's way up there.
What?
Yeah. Sebastian's 17 now. He's
How is he?
He's got his sleeves rolled up. He's working on an old Impala, and he's gonna be fine.
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness.
My middle child, Sats, is a huge fan of school. It's her career. She just absolutely is the most dedicated student I've ever seen. And Sebastian is too, but so this has been really hard for her not having school. Now she's got school online. It's part of it. She actually gets to interact with her teacher, some of the students, because they do Zoom stuff. So she's feeling more connected back in school and feeling. My 6-year-old, just her favorite part of school was recess and lunch. So she's, I think, doing a little bit better than anybody. She's like, yeah, I didn't need that anyway. She's going to have a hard time going back to school. I think everybody else can't wait for it. Yeah. She's going to be like, ugh.
I was thinking the other day, because, I run teen programs, and I've been trying to figure out if or how that's going to happen this summer. But I did a bunch of interviews with teenagers, group interviews, over the past few weeks over Zoom. And I just kind of started thinking about what it must be like specifically to be like 15, 16, 17 right now. And how, just because of the hormones, if nothing else, just the fact that, like, I don't know, when I was a teenager, I would randomly start crying And my parents would be like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "I don't know." Like, it's just the hormones are insane, and the
Yep.
social pressure is insane, and you're convinced people are talking about you behind your back, or they're having conversations without you, or whatever. And like now, people have opportunities to do that over FaceTime and Zoom, and like it seems like the pressure of being a teen is insane, and now being stuck inside seems like it would be so rough.
It could be better for some kids, though. Like, you know, if you don't like school, if you are bullied, or, you know, if school causes you a ton of anxiety for all those social reasons, you know, perhaps there are a bunch of kids who are a lot happier. I mean, there's a lot of kids who are going through issues because they're stuck in bad family situations.
Yeah.
But, you know,
I had a relatively good childhood, honestly. However, by those years you're talking about, the house was a powder keg. I would have run away.
Right.
I'd just been like,
just run. Yeah. Gotta go.
I'm hitting the road. Don't know where I'm going. I'm going to get a knapsack. I'm going to jump on a train. I'm going to be somewhere else because you're exactly right. I think I left home before the age of 17 anyway. So I don't know that. Yeah. I don't know that, if they told me I had to stay in the house, forget it. It just would not have happened. And you know, the other thing is too, is like, I remember it was younger, but we were in the end of the Cold War because I'm that old. And we were seeing the movies. I can't remember what the thing was. There was this thing they played on television, which is also a thing, dating, which was talking about the aftermath of a nuclear war. And they did these polls like, what do you think the chances there will be a nuclear war in 20 years? And I was like 100% sure. I just was so like ready, like, you know what? What's the point? If we're all going to die in this thing, let's have a good life right now and party and do all that. I can see kids with that sort of attitude now going like, well, if the whole world's going to die from the virus, I'm going to still go to spring break. And there's this girl who was in the news.
That was the headline was, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die.
Yeah. And there was this girl who was like, who made national news. She was one of these kids who went to spring break in Florida and was on camera going like, you know, I'm young. I'm probably not going to I can't even get it anyway. I'm not going to let the virus get in the way of my life. Of course, she contracted coronavirus on spring break in Florida and was on a respirator for like 10 days. And then she posted this, did this interview where she looks like she aged a decade. She was this bright young teenager and looks like worn and has like, you know, dehydrated face with having a respirator on. Yeah. She was sick for a long time. She's like, this is not a joke. I totally regret feeling immortal. This is serious. Like, thankfully she got to do that interview.
To take it back a step. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're all allowed to make mistakes and we're all going to do it. Hopefully when we make a lot of them when you're young, because it gets, you make them late.
So there's
too.
a story.
There's
a story right now. Some like 24-year-old kid had a party at his parents' house with like 100 people packed wall to wall. Turns out his mom is is on the front line of healthcare, is a nurse, and has been social distancing from her family for over a month because she doesn't want her family to catch it. Like, and she didn't even know. She came home, the house is all clean and everything's great.
Extra clean.
She didn't know until like the police came. They're like, excuse me, do you know anything about the giant party that happened here? Turns out your 24-year-old child was an idiot.
Jerk.
was a jerk. Really?
What a jerk.
Seriously? Like, as a mom, I'd be like, I'm working my butt off. I'm isolating from the family to keep you healthy and safe. And you go and pull a stunt like that. Can you see me when I'm older and Kai's a teenager? Oh my God.
Yeah. Yep.
So, have I ever told this story about getting being a teenager and one of the parents was recording phone calls?
Oh, what? No.
Yeah. So
That's
one of the
sad.
girls in the circle of friends, parents, was recording their phone calls because they were trying to keep their kid off of drugs and out of trouble. Okay. And I was probably our circle of friends, I was probably the one that had half a foot in school and the other foot like probably going to prison. I will, full disclosure, I did made the bad choices consistently. Consistently. Except for
job.
one thing. I would do whatever my grandmother needed. So there's this big party and there's this phone call where they're asking if I can bring drugs to this party or if I know anybody who has drugs. And the whole time I'm like, yeah, well, I'm not going to go to this party. I don't know. And why not? I was like, well, I got to help my grandmother. I'm going to be working on the foundation. We have to replace boards in the foundation of the house. So yeah, I'm not going. Wish I could be there, but yeah, no, I got to go. And I was suddenly like, all these kids got banned from hanging out with each other because the words of all the other kids who had interacted and had these conversations were recorded, except for me. I was the one kid.
You're like, that's a nice boy who takes care of
That's
his
the good
grandma.
boy. That's the
Good boy.
It's the only one thing that I would do. Like, with any like, I gotta go mow my grandmother's
But
lawn.
that's the thing, man. The law-abiding nerds, we always get in trouble when we step a foot out of line. It's the rebels who get away with murder.
It's like magic. Just like magic. The one call I was recorded in, the whole time is like, I'm like,
God,
no
that's how it
partying
always
for
goes,
me.
man.
I gotta do the good thing for my grandmother. I'm gonna miss the big party on account of it.
If it had been any other phone call on any other day, it could have been a completely different outcome.
And I guarantee you, any of the other kids in that were getting recorded were trying to talk
Oh yeah.
5 levels more badass than they were, and were trying to brag and like probably saying whatever, and probably had never gotten in trouble because they'd never been in trouble because they never done any bad.
That's what I'm saying.
But this was their one big party they were going to get it all out on, and to me it was just another day. So I'm like, I'm not going.
That's really funny. I think it's hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Sadie, are you sleeping?
nerdy students.
This little
the
girl,
cool kids.
past her bedtime.
Yeah. I mean, right? Yeah. Now, who cares about the nerdy students and the cool kids? And you just.
I
you're
think
at
they're the
home,
same
what out
thing
there.
now.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
More or less. I don't
I mean,
know
being
anything.
a nerd is like hip now in a cool way. It's neat. Like
Yeah.
it's okay to
Well,
be.
no, it's
knit
parenting.
now.
It's parenting has realized that's a better outcome. So parents are raising nerds
I
intentionally
don't
now.
think so.
Whereas
I
there-
think
No. In the old days, like,
technology is what did
what
it.
are you doing with the pocket
Personally.
calculator, kid? You don't want to grow up like that. Go join the football team. What are you, a sissy? Like, this parents
Yeah,
are
because
stupid.
owning an
Dads were
auto
awful.
shop was the right thing to do
Yeah.
back then.
They learned
But
something
now,
practical playing with the
now-
computer.
Technology is the window to everything.
Yes.
So knowing how tech works is actually like a magical key to all of the things that people want access to. So
Justin just disappeared. Did he like just hang up? He's like, I'm out of here.
I don't know.
That's it. I'm out of here. It's a magical thing. I wonder though, the thing that Justin mentioned, that idea of, what kids are what they're gonna be saying or responding to in the future. I mean, there was the Cold War that had people in fear of nuclear war for a while. Smoke them if you got them attitudes. There was HIV that led to a generation of people afraid to have sex. There's, they're, now, like, what is this? And then we had kids who were brought up during Desert Storm and our wars in Afghanistan, which are kind of far off and distant things. But, is COVID going to affect all these kids that from, for the next
Definitely
year and a half, 2 years, who knows how long, there's going to be some degree of social distancing. Things are not going to be the same. And how will that change it? It's going to be really interesting.
Gaurav Sharma in the chat room. Yes, I'm. It's not Sadie, but Satya. And yes, I am raising her to be a nerd. Absolutely, I'm raising nothing but nerds, except the youngest one. She's going to rebel. She wants to be a stand-up comedian.
Sweet.
That's going to be like her calling. Yeah, and I can't argue with her because she's way smarter than me.
That's great. Yeah, Kai's a smart kid, and honestly, I think I have issues with the establishment, and the establishment,
and you're the establishment to him.
I'm the establishment to him, and he asks me in the morning, he's like, why do I have to go to school? And the only answer I have is because. I'm like, I don't know. I really don't know. You can learn anything you want these days. So I don't know.
The establishment is why. You're right.
Yeah.
Expected
norms. I just tell him that he needs to learn how to be a functioning member of society and not to be an idiot or a jerk.
Yeah, Robert Bigelow in the chat says questioning authority is never a bad thing in a democracy. That's true. Right? It would be nice if we actually did live in a democracy. Then that would be a valid point.
Yeah, well,
touche.
Okay.
In a representative democracy, it's not quite the same because you have gerrymandering and all that good stuff that makes it not really a democracy.
You know what? Okay, so there's an argument here, and this is not probably time to get into this. If we had, it's probably a 7-minute conversation. We probably only have about 5 minutes left. But be careful what you wish for, Blair, because I don't think we know what happens with the real math. I think there's a lot of Republican votes, maybe, and blue states that don't vote because California is going to vote a certain way. And there's plenty of blue votes in the red states that don't vote because it's a red state. I think if it was all evened out, we don't know what the actual number would be. If every vote counted.
The point is we don't know. And we're supposed to know what people want.
I don't want a completely democratic representation for everything because I think on whole, the nation is too big, it's too diverse, and there's too many, I'm going to say it, idiots in our country. There's just too many.
But what about entire communities?
California,
specifically, hold on, Justin, of
perfect for me, and I will never leave.
Non-white people who don't vote because they know their votes don't count. That is what I'm talking about.
What are you talking about?
There are places in this great country of ours where there are entire communities of non-white humans that don't vote or do vote and don't count. And that is what I think is terrible, is the gerrymandering that occurs in places of our country where it has been zoned exactly so entire communities are disenfranchised.
Yeah, that the gerrymandering that has occurred, and even beyond the gerrymandering, the non-political but social influences that keep people from voting. So making it harder for people to access polling places, making it harder for people to get off of work, to be able to go get to those polling places. Sometimes fully just erasing people from the voting rolls. Like just like the things that happen. It's like, what is going on here? Yeah, there's so much
telling entire
to disenfranchise people.
Of people that the voting day is a different day. Or
that's
that you can vote online, or any number of things that are intentionally trying to suppress votes. It's not okay. Not
Yeah,
okay.
that's very illegal. And it turns out I did that on my very first appearance on TWIS.
What?
Yeah. I was being sarcastic though. But I was like, remember, Tuesday, if you are a registered Democrat or independent, that's your day to vote. If you're registered Republican, you need to wait till Wednesday. Which is very illegal. I found out. But
After the
but I was
fact.
being sarcastic. I was
You were
being
making
very
a
Yeah, it was
joke.
a joke.
It was sarcastic.
Poetic
The reporter had
license or
asked the
whatever.
question, and I was sarcastically answering it to the good doctor next to me. So.
Shubru in the chat room says, I have permanent absentee vote by mail status. So do I. Whoa.
Yes.
However, there are certain people out there trying to make it harder to maintain permanent vote by mail status. Another way that people are trying to suppress votes of people who can't get to the polls.
Sweet.
So
and they're trying to get rid of the post office, the postal service. Let's keep buying stamps, everybody.
Oh my
Support
god.
the postal service because the postal service is part of what allows or will allow more people to vote by mail.
Oh yes, Nord said it's not illegal if you're being sarcastic. We just learned that.
Yeah.
What was it, yesterday?
We did.
So,
Yeah.
it's good.
Yeah.
Right. We did just learn that the other day.
Uh-huh.
I was being sarcastic. Mm-hmm.
But there's also problems like the two-party system is really flawed. I don't know how we like the
How do we get away from a two-party system so
Yeah.
that we
Okay.
can actually
Great question.
have
well
the
here,
real
I mean, parliamentary
here's
governments
choice.
are also flawed.
Yes.
So like there's no perfect system.
everywhere. Yes.
So one almost I voted. I'm just gonna talk the politics here. I voted for Obama the first time in the primary, but I would never have voted for Hillary, even if she made it all the way against whoever she was running against. And here's why: that would have meant the presidency of the United States had gone Bush, Clinton, Bush, Clinton. That's not acceptable. That is absolutely unacceptable. If your family has been president with that last name, wait 100 years. Wait 100 years before running again.
We don't
What
have
about the
monarchies,
Roosevelts?
right?
There's
No
more
monarchies.
people.
Roosevelts.
There's more people on the planet. Like it's not necessary. It's absolutely not necessary. That would have been the worst signal of a dead democracy to have two-family rule for 20-something years. That would have been nonsense. Now, I'm not saying we're faring better now.
I don't think it would have been worse than what we have right now.
Yeah, you know what? It would have. It would have. Do you know why it would have? Because they have been doing 20, 30 years of anti-Hillary propaganda. Now, I don't care how great a candidate she might have been. When you've done 20, 30 years of conspiracy theory propaganda against somebody.
Against her for so long.
Can you imagine if this had happened and she was president? The government's shutting it down with the fake virus because they're trying to take your guns. This is the government taking over the world like we predict. We've been telling you. We've been warning. It's the Illuminati. They're taking your. They're going to take your freedom.
So instead, it's just a bunch of progressives being upset that.
They would have incited actual Civil War type violence with the amount of anti-American propaganda that they have fostered. I don't
think I've ever seen you go that into
that was my whatever that missing chromosome.
Yeah, you're working on it. I saw that there.
Whatever InfoWars idiot does, where he's basically having conniptions and diarrhea in his shorts while he's on the air. It's absolutely like it would have been. It actually could have been worse. We could have had the Senate resisting any kind of closures. There could have been absolute infighting. It would have been just nonsense.
It would have been.
But would it have gotten this bad if the pandemic committee hadn't been disbanded and
right? We would have had
funding hadn't been cut, and
there were so many things that were destroyed.
We might not
that
even
was their purpose.
be where we are right now.
Yeah, it's, you know what, this virus is worse than, like, the information leak out of, I mean, I will agree that the president has said the wrong thing at every turn, but I will also just say that the governors have stepped in and ignored him at every turn. So I don't know. I think
So,
it did
I think-
require governors to take over a
But
lot
here,
of the
so
duties.
let me tell you something that I think is very interesting that we should maybe all take to heart. Our guest from last summer, and I'm blanking on her name. Do I have the book somewhere around here? No, I'm blanking on her name. Archaeologist uses satellites to study archaeological dig sites.
Oh yeah.
It's Archaeology from Space
yeah.
book. She's Indie from Space on Twitter. Don't know why I'm blanking on her name. She has been saying recently that we really all should be looking at the fall of the Egyptian Empire and to the fall of other past empires as we look at what's happening right now with the governors banding together and helping each other and forming coalitions because this has all happened before. And it wasn't good for whatever original union was before those coalitions took place. So this kind of movement, it historically has precedent toward larger unions breaking apart and the fall of empires. And people have been wondering whether or not the United States is... Yes, Sarah Parkack, thank you, Dave Shorty. But she's been talking about that a lot recently, which I think is quite interesting.
Which is also interesting if you go back to the big civilizations of the past. The one thing that preceded their fall in almost every case was a pandemic, or was a disease that ran through unhindered throughout their society that shut it down. This one's global, so I don't know that it will affect anyone specifically, but you could see a lot of tumbling of nations out there. President Cuomo, Daniel in the chat room. Okay, but I'm telling you, President Gavin Newsom, Governor Gavin Newsom,
That's my money for sure.
California, done a much better job. And if you hear him talk, he is insanely informed and delivers so much. I think, Cuomo's more charismatic. For sure. I think he'd probably have a better.
I don't know.
win.
I disagree.
Oh, look at that. Yeah. I love Newsom. I think I'm so happy.
I
he's
met
my
him when
governor.
I was in high school. He came and he visited my high school
Landon's got a
when he was mayor.
favorite.
No, actually what I loved was that he legalized gay marriage in San Francisco and he knew
Yeah.
it was only going to be for a day. And a bunch
Get
of
on out here.
I will never forget that a bunch of my teachers in high school called out sick to go get gay married.
Yeah.
and they knew it wasn't
Yeah.
going to last, but they wanted to do it so bad. And he even said, I realize they're going to overturn this at the end of the day, but I realize I have the power to do this and give these people their day, and I'm going to do it.
And he was there at
knew it was
the big
right.
courthouse on the steps, making sure nobody
Yeah.
stopped it from happening.
It's so,
he's
ugh.
a hero.
It gives me
He's a
goosebumps
real hero.
just thinking about it. It just, for whatever you have to say about whatever else, it proves the kind of politician he is, and he's willing to take a stand for things that he thinks are right, and he'll stand up for himself as well in a way that is, as you said, articulate and.
Yeah. If you haven't seen any of Newsom's talking on the COVID about what's going on, just do it. Watch it next to Trump or a Cuomo. I feel like he's just almost intentionally making a fool out of anybody else who's doing one of these conferences that doesn't have the statistician guy with the numbers there, because he's got all the numbers. He's got the number of respirators, the ones in action, the ones still in reserve. He knows how many are being used for week 2 or week 3. He throws all of that information out there.
I just
Whereas
love
some
that
guys
he
are
was
can't answer a single numbers question. He's got it all. Or he's got the guy right next to him that has the answer.
I love that in a state of outdoor recreation as one of our main pastimes, and a lot of people out there worried about their fishing, he spent 10 minutes being like, listen, I understand.
You're gonna fish.
You want to get out there.
Fish.
I'm going to let you fish.
I love it.
not now.
Just stop it. Not right now.
Just like,
And-
just kind of no
and-
nonsense. Just like, I hear you. I understand your concern. But my concern is that people don't die. So put the poll away for a few weeks. We'll get there.
And he also threw out that, you know what? And when we get out there, like me included, fishing's going to be great. Because nobody's fished these spots for a while. It's going to be he's fantastic, though. He's doing a really good job.
Yeah.
And the contrast is like, I have long explained to people from other countries that the United States is 50 different countries.
It is.
It's not one nation. And I consider myself a Californian. And I don't necessarily relate to people from other states in a weird way because
There are
it
cultural
is different.
differences.
It's like
Mhm.
people might think of Scandinavia as the same. The Danes and the Swedes fought each other for over 1,000 years, and to this day they're like kind of just lukewarm about each other. To us, it's like you both eat the same foods. You both
This
basically
is, social
speak the
science
same
agrees
language.
with this. They say that when you talk about America, people have extremely polar reactions to that. It could be very pro, it could be very anti, it could be very uneasy, or like big government is scary, or any number of things. But if you talk about state or city, it is almost always coupled with some sort of pride or identity that make people engaged. And I mean, it makes sense. Our country's enormous.
Yeah, it's half a continent, more than half a continent. And yeah, and like, and there's a weird thing, there's disconnects because it's like, I consider myself a little left of liberal, and most East Coast liberals, they're very far right of me, very far right. I think of California. It's why a guy like Bernie Sanders won California. We aren't playing the same game that the rest of the country is over here, which is why we are one of those states that gives more money than we take from the federal government. It's one of the reasons why we're one of those states that actually has pretty decent education and healthcare. But we have problems too. Anyway, I think it's time to say goodnight, Blair.
Yeah.
Good night, Blair. Say good night, Justin.
Good night, Justin.
Good night,
Kiki.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of This Week in Science. It was wonderful to chat with you all. Thank you for sticking around for the for the after show.
It's afternoon somewhere.
It is somewhere out there. I'm tired, I think. It's 11. It is time.
I'm
It's sleepy
tired.
time. Yes, it is sleepy time. Everyone stay healthy, stay well. Our thoughts are with you all. And we will see you again next week. We'll be back on Wednesday. Are you going to be here, Justin?
I don't know. I'll know on Friday.
You'll know on Friday. Okay, let me know on Friday if you'll be here next week.
Are you trying to
Make a butterfly shot it wall
fly away?
puppet?
He's making shadow puppets. He's trying to make shadow puppets.
No, I think I'll be in training for an unnamed biotech company.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
We will wait and
That's
see.
right. I thought you were like, ooh, California's dropping its guard. I'm leaving.
Oh, if it does? No, I have to stick around for a while. Because
Are you doing school still?
things, huh?
Are you doing school still?
Yeah, well, I'll finish up school just as training is coming to an end. Or just before training comes to an end, before I have to go to full time. So yeah, I'm doing 5 classes, 15 units, and
Is
right
someone
now
microwaving something?
it's over there.
It's
Somebody
not
got
me.
a fire alarm going on?
No, not here.
Not
It's
me.
got to be you, Justin. What's beeping? something on fire?
It's something here. Oh, got it.
Is it alarm clock? Do you need to wake up for the show now?
11:01. What the hell?
Somebody set the alarm at the hotel.
For 11:01 p.m.
Jerk.
And with that,
What a jerk. That's funny, though.
go to bed.
What a jerk.
I would call that not dope as hell.
Yeah.
Shrews are dope as hell. On that
Um,
note, you tell us what's up. Let me know when you know.
Yeah, Friday.
I want to know what you
we'll
know when you know it. Okay.
Friday,
Awesome.
we'll know.
Cool. All right, everybody. Have a good one. Good night. Darn it, I hit the wrong thing again. Good night.